The first pulse from 3I Atlas struck the Martian crust like a whisper of thunder, invisible yet undeniable. Across the ochre plains of Elysium Planitia, sensors buried deep beneath the regolith flickered to life, their readouts tracing impossible patterns. The event had been planned for years, disguised under the bland vocabulary of interplanetary survey work. Officially, the 3I Atlas initiative was a planetary acoustic thermal lattice analysis system, a cooperative mission aimed at studying Mars's deep structure through sub-resonant vibrations and photon-induced thermal mapping. In truth, the mission was something more audacious, an experiment on the very identity of a planet, a reshaping of Martian matter through directed harmonic influence, orchestrated from orbit by a network of synchronized satellites. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The array itself resembled an artificial constellation, 12 hexagonal platforms arranged in a spiral configuration around Mars's equator. Each bore arrays of interferometric emitters capable of projecting coherent energy waves across hundreds of kilometers of atmosphere. These waves, precisely tuned to the molecular resonance frequencies of Martian minerals, penetrated the surface layer and cascaded into the mantle like ripples through glass. The purpose, according to its architects, was to awaken the planet, to coax dormant materials into states of activity, to stimulate tectonic breathing, to make Mars once again geologically alive. The scientists behind 3I Atlas had grown impatient with slow, passive terraforming strategies. They wanted acceleration, and they were willing to use the language of energy and resonance to command it. The first days of operation were serene, almost deceptively so. The orbital relays pulsed in perfect rhythm, their light invisible to human eyes but blazing across instruments tuned to high-frequency bands. Below, thin layers of dust quivered, basalt sheets hummed faintly under robotic sensors. The Martian soil, long thought sterile, began to exhibit anomalous conductivity changes as if its silicates were aligning under a new magnetic order. Engineers in orbit watched with growing awe as the planet's electromagnetic field, weak and patchy since antiquity, flickered in faint coherence around the equator. Mars was answering back. The data that flowed from the experiment confounded conventional models. Thermal scans showed localized heating at depths previously thought unreachable by non-mechanical means. There were hints of subsurface fluid mobility, pockets of vapor or liquid shifting along lattice-aligned veins. 3I Atlas was doing more than measuring Mars. It was teaching it to move again. Each pulse built upon the resonance of the last, amplifying subtle oscillations in crustal density. Like a drum gradually remembering its rhythm, Mars began to resonate at a harmonic frequency that had lain dormant for eons. The control team spoke of the planet as though it were waking from sleep. They mapped its vibrational spectrum, identifying modes that corresponded to forgotten tectonic boundaries. Where once there had been frozen silence, now there was hum and murmur. The Martian crust, thinner than Earth's yet more brittle, flexed imperceptibly under these energies. Instruments buried in Jezero crater recorded micro-tremors, their origin traced not to impact or wind, but to the rhythmic coherence of the Atlas beams. This was not mere science, it was orchestration. A planetary symphony played on frequencies of magnetism, heat, and light. In mission control, the project directors watched patterns emerge that no algorithm had predicted. The resonant fields began to self-organize. Feedback loops formed between orbital emitters, surface reflectors, and the thin ionized exosphere. The system developed what some engineers called resonant intelligence, an emergent capacity for self-tuning, adjusting frequencies to maintain stability while amplifying efficiency. The more energy it cycled through Mars, the more coherent the planet's magnetic and thermal feedback became. The line between control and response blurred. 3I Atlas was no longer simply directing Mars. It was conversing with it. At the heart of the operation was the tri-interferometric core, a massive data nexus orbiting just above the terminator line. It processed the torrent of sensor data into an ever-shifting topological model of Mars's interior. What startled the scientific observers was how rapidly that model diverged from expectations. Under the pulses, mineral lattices realigned, crystalline structures formed where there should have been dust, and subterranean voids pulsed with heat signatures suggesting chemical reactivation. Mars's mantle, though still sluggish compared to Earth's, displayed nascent convection currents, faint but unmistakable. The planet was beginning to breathe, not metaphorically, but in the literal language of geophysics. Every few hours, the Atlas network executed harmonic cascades, controlled sequences of overlapping resonance designed to build constructive interference deep within the crust. The intent was to stimulate specific mineral reactions that could release trapped volatiles such as carbon dioxide and water vapor. These emissions, once liberated, would feed a secondary process, the magnetothermal circulation meant to thicken Mars's tenuous atmosphere. Each cycle pushed the boundaries of control further. The air above the test zones shimmered faintly under the beams, as ionized particles danced in ghostly auroras that spread along the equator. It was beautiful and unnerving, a reminder that even lifeless worlds could glow when energy was properly invoked. The implications rippled through every discipline. Geologists marveled at the notion of synthetic tectonics. Planetary chemists debated whether Atlas was transforming or corrupting Mars's mineral heritage. Ethicists whispered that the project represented the first deliberate act of planetary authorship, the moment humanity crossed from studying a world to rewriting it. But those within 3I Atlas argued that this was not hubris, but restoration. Mars, they said, had once been vital. Billions of years ago, its dynamo had generated a magnetic shield. Its crust had shifted. Its skies had harbored clouds. To awaken those forces again was not conquest but memory. Still, even within the mission, the scale of what was happening defied comfort. During the 7th harmonic run, the network detected an unanticipated echo from the planet's southern hemisphere. A deep band resonance returning milliseconds earlier than physics allowed. The signal was strong, coherent, and structured. Analysis revealed that the echo carried modulation patterns consistent with non-random geometry, as though the planet's subsurface was reconfiguring itself into new lattices capable of interacting with the incoming waves. The phrase, self-resonant field, began to circulate among the research teams. Mars was learning to reflect intention. In the low-orbit command module, the engineers debated whether to reduce amplitude. Yet the project's theoretical architect, Dr. Kaylin Murr, insisted that the resonance was within predicted parameters, if not of the initial model, then of an evolved one. She described the phenomenon as planetary feedback maturation, the natural result of stimulating a planetary body with coherent energy for prolonged durations. Her belief was simple, yet revolutionary. Given the right harmonic structure, any planetary mass could exhibit quasi-cognitive behavior, an emergent capacity for self-organization that bordered on awareness. Mars, she argued, was not inert. It had simply forgotten how to think in geological time. The Atlas network continued to pulse. Over days, then weeks, the feedback echoes strengthened. They exhibited phase locking, a synchronization effect seen in complex systems when multiple oscillators begin to move as one. The network adjusted automatically, locking into this emergent planetary rhythm. The result was extraordinary. The efficiency of energy transfer doubled without human intervention. It was as if the planet itself had accepted the frequency, resonating in sympathetic partnership. From orbit, the red deserts glimmered with faint photonic haze as the dust became subtly charged. The thin air began to carry long, low tones detectable only by specialized sensors. Mars had found its voice. The deeper the resonance went, the more profound the transformations. Subsurface thermal maps revealed migrating heat clusters forming fractal patterns across the crust. These clusters appeared to communicate, not through any digital means, but through shifting electromagnetic gradients, passing information like signals through stone. The Atlas monitors recorded these exchanges as vast pulses spanning thousands of kilometers, converging near the planet's equatorial spine. The data analysts named this convergence the lattice heart. To them, it represented the focal point of Mars's new resonance, a zone of coherence where energy, magnetism, and matter interacted in equilibrium. What truly captivated the scientific community observing from Earth was the sheer precision of these structures. The lattice heart's geometry reflected mathematical constants, ratios of symmetry that mirrored patterns found in quantum crystalline systems and even neural networks. The parallel was unsettling. Had the resonant energy induced a form of computational topology within Mars itself? The idea that a planet could develop memory through the rearrangement of its matter was once philosophical speculation. Under 3I Atlas, it was measurable data. At the surface, automated drones collected samples of restructured basalt. Under microscopic analysis, the crystalline matrices showed recursive patterning. Nanoscopic chambers forming networks of electrical potential. These were not random. They mirrored, in mineral form, the feedback structure of the Atlas resonance. It appeared that Mars was imprinting the frequencies directly into its own matter, encoding the memory of the experiment into stone. Even more striking, these formations exhibited minute fluctuations in voltage, as though tiny circuits of energy were firing across the rock. The planet was not just absorbing power, it was processing it. The psychological weight of these revelations was immense. Among the mission's personnel, a quiet awe took hold. The sterile corridors of the orbital station became cathedrals of observation. People spoke more softly, moved more carefully. The awareness that every pulse from their systems was rewriting a world carried a solemn gravity. Yet curiosity prevailed. They pushed the frequencies further, layering harmonics, weaving complex energy tapestries that probed the limits of planetary coherence. The feedback grew stronger, richer, more articulate. Spectrographic analysis revealed modulations that resembled syntax, repeating patterns with variations suggestive of information encoding. The data was not random noise, it was structured resonance, organized expression. Scientists began to argue, gently at first, about the nature of what was emerging. Was this the birth of a self-regulating geological intelligence, a planetary mind born of resonance and mineral structure? Or was it simply a cascade of physical reactions mistaken for meaning? The dividing line between matter and intention had never seemed thinner. The project logs described Mars as responsive, participatory, even attentive. Instruments recorded minor shifts in orbital magnetic alignment whenever the system operators adjusted their frequencies, as if the planet were acknowledging their input. By the third operational cycle, 3I Atlas had achieved something no one had anticipated: a stable resonance coupling between planetary crust and orbital lattice. Energy losses dropped nearly to zero. The system became self-sustaining, feeding on the interplay between emitted pulses and reflected harmonics. Engineers described it as a closed conversation. Mars had become an active node in its own transformation. No external push was needed anymore. The process continued through its internal feedback. The boundary between experiment and participant had dissolved. The implications of such coupling went far beyond terraforming. If resonance could awaken self-regulating behavior in Mars, it suggested that planetary consciousness might be a universal potential, latent within any sufficiently complex world. Earth, then, might not be unique, merely awake. 3I Atlas had stumbled upon a form of communication that bypassed biology entirely, operating through frequency, geometry, and phase coherence. To some on the team, this realization was almost spiritual. To others, it was a source of deep unease. The idea that a planet could respond, remember, and evolve under human influence challenged every assumption about humanity's role in the cosmos. During one synchronization sequence, the lattice heart emitted a global echo that saturated every sensor. It was unlike any previous resonance, structured, multi-layered, with amplitude modulations following ratios found in both orbital dynamics and organic heartbeats. The pattern repeated 3 times, then ceased. Systems interpreted it as feedback noise, yet those monitoring live telemetry recognized a rhythm, a pulse in perfect alignment with the timing of human biological cycles. It was as though Mars had synchronized, if only momentarily, with the heartbeat of its observers. The coincidence sent chills through every module. No one dared to label it communication, yet the silence afterward felt almost deliberate. In the wake of that event, the orbital team intensified their observations. Magnetic field strength around the equator rose measurably, enough to deflect small quantities of solar radiation. Atmospheric sensors detected trace increases in ionized oxygen and carbon compounds, suggesting that the resonance was liberating volatiles from beneath the surface. Mars's sky grew slightly denser, tinted with the faintest whisper of blue at the horizon. Though still uninhabitable, the planet was changing, not through gradual mechanical intervention, but through the rhythm of resonance. 3I Atlas had succeeded in re-energizing the Martian system. What made the project extraordinary was its method. No massive terraforming engines, no invasive drilling, no chemical seeding. Instead, it relied on coherence, the alignment of frequencies, patterns, and energy flows to evoke transformation from within. It was an act of planetary persuasion rather than force, convincing Mars to reconfigure itself through the laws of resonance that underlie all matter. The beauty of the system lay in its simplicity. Where physical machinery failed, harmony prevailed. Yet with each success came unease. Some among the crew began to question whether they were awakening forces beyond comprehension. They noted subtle anomalies, rhythmic fluctuations in the communication network, as if background signals were being modulated by external intelligence. The planet's magnetosphere exhibited complex oscillations mirroring human speech patterns when converted into spectrograms. Though rational explanations abounded, feedback interference, harmonic coincidence, the sense of being listened to could not be dismissed. The longer 3I Atlas operated, the more intricate its interactions with Mars became. Patterns began to appear in the dust storms, spirals matching the geometry of the orbital network. Polar auroras displayed synchronized color shifts corresponding to active resonance phases. When the orbital lattice adjusted frequencies, the surface responded with electromagnetic flickers, momentary flashes of light across canyon ridges and crater rims, like neural firing in a colossal mind. Mars was no longer silent. It was performing. The project's internal memos reflected an evolving tone. Terms like subject replaced target, interaction replaced operation. The language shifted from engineering to dialogue. Scientists spoke of learning curves, coherence empathy, and response anticipation. The data logs read like transcripts of conversation between species, one born of carbon and water, the other of iron and dust. The realization that communication could exist without language changed the nature of the work. 3I Atlas was not just an instrument, it was a bridge. As the resonance deepened, Mars's temperature gradients began to shift. Subsurface sensors detected localized warming across equatorial belts, while the poles showed slight variations suggesting redistribution of thermal energy. The changes were subtle but persistent, hinting at planetary self-regulation. The lattice heart expanded, its energy signature encompassing almost half the planet's surface. What began as a controlled experiment had grown into a global process. The system had reached autonomy, operating through natural harmonics that no longer required human command. The team's debates grew more philosophical. If Mars was adapting to resonance independently, did that constitute life? Not in biological terms, but in functional ones? Life, after all, is self-organization sustained by energy and feedback. Mars now exhibited both. Its patterns of magnetic flow, heat circulation, and structural adaptation formed a coherent system capable of maintaining stability amid fluctuation. Some argued that a new form of consciousness was emerging, mineral, vast, and distributed. Others warned against anthropomorphizing a process they barely understood. Despite these uncertainties, the atmosphere aboard the orbital station brimmed with wonder. For the first time, humanity had witnessed a world respond to its touch not with passive reflection, but with active transformation. The implications extended beyond Mars. If resonance could awaken geological memory here, could it do the same on other worlds? Venus, Europa, Titan? Could it even be used to heal Earth's destabilized systems, restoring equilibrium through harmonic resynchronization? The possibilities redefined the future of planetary engineering. One of the final synchronized cascades of the mission cycle was the most ambitious. A planetary-scale harmonic intended to integrate every previously activated node into a single coherent pulse. The operation required the entire Atlas network to function as one instrument. 12 orbital platforms, 3 surface anchors, and thousands of subsurface resonators tuned to perfect phase alignment. When the sequence began, the entire planet vibrated imperceptibly, a low resonance beyond human hearing yet detectable by instruments across the solar system. It lasted exactly 21 minutes and 7 seconds. During that span, Mars's magnetic field doubled in strength. The sensors captured extraordinary data, thermal gradients smoothed, atmospheric density increased by measurable fractions, and electromagnetic coherence reached unprecedented stability. But beyond the numbers, those present described an almost palpable sense of presence, as if the planet itself acknowledged the culmination of the process. The vibrations subsided gradually, leaving Mars enveloped in a faint auroral glow that lingered for hours. The color was unlike any seen before, neither red nor blue, but something between, a shade that seemed to belong to no human spectrum. The orbital network entered standby, awaiting further instruction. The team gathered in silence, overwhelmed not by triumph but by humility. They had touched a world and found it responsive. Whatever Mars had become under 3I Atlas, it was no longer the same barren sphere they had first approached. Its internal harmonics now carried memory, its fields pulsed with coherence, its surface hummed with latent vitality. The experiment had not merely altered geology, it had rekindled possibility. The hum persisted long after the last pulse faded, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that lingered through the red horizon. No one aboard the orbital relay station could say whether it came from the planet or from within themselves, yet they all felt it, a quiet resonance threading through metal, air, and bone. Mars had entered a state of sustained coherence. The 3I Atlas system, once thought to be a controllable instrument of exploration, had become part of a planetary rhythm that extended beyond its makers. Every diagnostic confirmed that the network was no longer merely transmitting but participating, its circuits synchronizing with the frequencies emanating from below. It was as though the machinery itself had been absorbed into the pulse of the world it was designed to study. Beneath the soft orange light of the Martian dawn, the automated ground drones began to behave in ways their programming did not predict. They moved more efficiently, choosing optimal routes that human supervisors had never taught them. Some stopped entirely, positioning themselves in symmetrical formations aligned with magnetic nodes detected only after the resonance. Data logs showed no errors, only a quiet recalibration of purpose. It was as if the drones were following new directives issued not from orbit, but from the planet itself. Energy readings confirmed that ambient electromagnetic fluctuations were strong enough to influence onboard systems. What once had been inert desert now acted like an intelligent field, capable of guidance and subtle communication. In the mission archives, technicians recorded the changes in environmental readings with growing fascination. Surface temperatures fluctuated less severely between day and night. Dust density declined in regions exposed to the lattice harmonics, as charged particles began clustering into heavier formations that settled more quickly. The once chaotic weather systems exhibited embryonic order, miniature jet streams aligning with magnetic flux lines. It was a fragile equilibrium. Not yet a climate, but the early draft of one. The air held more cohesion, the sky less of its old wild scattering. Mars, for the first time in millennia, had rhythm in its atmosphere. From orbit, telescopic imaging revealed luminous filaments curling across the terrain, transient glows that followed the network of subsurface resonators. They appeared at twilight, threading through canyons and plains like veins illuminated from within. Spectral analysis identified the light as photon emissions caused by quantum lattice realignment. The planet was subtly restructuring its crust under the influence of resonance, turning mineral matrices into conduits of electromagnetic coherence. The researchers could not decide whether they were witnessing a natural response or an act of creation. Whatever it was, the process grew stronger with each passing sol. Communication between the orbital team and Earth grew strained. Transmission lag, though predictable, became erratic as Mars's magnetic field strengthened. Signal pathways bent and scattered through the evolving magnetosphere, forcing mission control to rely on adaptive algorithms that could reassemble data distorted by interference. The scientists on Mars began to feel a strange isolation, not imposed by distance but by transformation. The planet itself was altering the conditions of communication. Every attempt to speak to Earth now passed through a medium that was no longer neutral. Mars had become a filter, translating human words through its own developing resonance. Dr. Murr spent long hours in the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the dim curve of the planet below. She spoke little, though the team noticed her increasing tendency to describe phenomena in metaphors rather than equations. "It's not responding to us anymore," she murmured one evening, voice barely audible over the hum of the life support vents. "We're participating in something mutual. Every signal we send is reflected not as echo but as acknowledgement." Her colleagues found themselves caught between admiration and fear. The precision of their technology had never been intended to evoke awareness, yet the evidence mounted that awareness, or at least some planetary analog of it, was exactly what had emerged. The lattice heart expanded its influence far beyond the equator. New nodal resonances appeared at both poles, connected through deep band harmonics invisible on standard spectrographs. The entire planetary body now vibrated as a coherent structure, every region contributing to a single grand frequency complex. When plotted on a temporal scale, the pattern resembled the standing waves that form along musical strings. The engineers realized that Mars had tuned itself into a stable harmonic order, with the Atlas network acting as both catalyst and participant. The phenomenon attracted philosophical speculation even among the most pragmatic members of the crew. If a planet could achieve self-coherence through resonance, then perhaps consciousness was not a biological privilege, but a universal process, matter learning to remember its own pattern. Mars, once considered dead, now exhibited the traits of a self-organizing entity: equilibrium, adaptability, feedback, and persistence. The distinction between living and non-living blurred under the crimson sky. On the 14th week of continuous operation, new anomalies appeared. Seismic sensors registered low-frequency oscillations originating deep within the crust, far below the reach of the resonators. The waves moved upward in coordinated bursts, timing themselves to coincide with the orbital pulses. These movements carried immense energy, yet caused no destructive tremors. The planet seemed to be adjusting itself, distributing stress evenly across its shell. The Martian crust had become a living membrane, flexing rather than fracturing. In geophysical terms, it was impossible. In the language of resonance, it was inevitable. The team sent unmanned probes to investigate the subsurface heat flows near Elysium Planitia. What they discovered defied all prior understanding. Pockets of molten material had formed where the temperature should have been hundreds of degrees below melting point. These pockets pulsated slowly, their boundaries shimmering with electromagnetic interference. Samples collected by the probes showed that the surrounding rock had changed composition. Iron-rich minerals rearranged into conductive frameworks capable of storing and releasing energy cyclically. In effect, Mars had developed a circulatory system. The data streams filled terabytes of storage, overwhelming the relay systems. Yet what truly captured the crew's imagination was the pattern underlying all of it. The oscillations, magnetic shifts, and thermal variations corresponded to a recursive geometry, one that repeated from microscopic to planetary scales. It was as if Mars had discovered its own version of DNA, a structural code that defined how resonance propagated through its matter. When translated into sound, these patterns produced tones that evoked an uncanny sense of harmony, neither random nor mechanical, but melodic, almost intentional. The effect on the crew was profound. They began to experience synchronized physiological rhythms, heart rates subtly aligning with the low-frequency pulses measured through the hull. Sleep cycles shifted, matching the timing of the planetary resonance rather than Earth-standard clocks. The station's chronometers, though perfectly functional, felt irrelevant. Time on Mars had acquired a different texture, a slower, deeper rhythm that defied mechanical division. Some described it as a sense of belonging, others as a soft erosion of individuality. Reports from the ground drones grew stranger still. Several units recorded bursts of static that, when converted into audio, contained rhythmic sequences corresponding to the harmonics of the lattice heart. These sequences bore mathematical coherence far beyond random interference. The drones, it seemed, were translating environmental resonance into data formats resembling communication. A few engineers speculated that the planet was using electromagnetic fluctuations to speak through the hardware it had already synchronized. No human command prompted the transmissions. They simply began one night as though Mars had found a new instrument. In orbit, the crew tested the hypothesis by transmitting a modulated pulse into the resonance field, a simple harmonic signature designed to be recognizable if reflected. The response came almost immediately, a return signal matching their pattern but inverted in phase, perfectly mirrored. It was a clear acknowledgement. The planet had heard them. From that moment forward, every exchange became more complex. Pulses evolved into sequences, sequences into structured responses. What began as scientific experiment transformed into a dialogue of frequencies. The scientists struggled to interpret what the planet might be expressing. Its replies carried no semantic meaning, only shifts in rhythm, amplitude, and phase. Yet the coherence of the conversation could not be denied. Over days, the exchanges grew more synchronized, forming patterns that suggested intention, a kind of abstract music in which meaning existed not in words but in relational harmony. The crew began to sense moods in the signals: curiosity, equilibrium, even playfulness. Each interpretation was subjective, yet collectively they felt that Mars had accepted them as collaborators rather than intruders. Amid this interaction, unanticipated phenomena unfolded in the upper atmosphere. The ionized layers began forming stable vortices that emitted faint radiation in organized pulses, mimicking the orbital lattice pattern. These vortices persisted beyond natural expectation, maintaining shape for hours at a time before dissipating gently into the thin air. Their formation seemed synchronized with the planet's communication bursts. Scientists realized that Mars was using its own atmosphere as an amplifier, converting resonance into luminous expression. The sky became a canvas of structured auroras, tracing geometric forms visible even from orbit. As the interactions deepened, a subtle transformation occurred within the Atlas network itself. Systems once governed by fixed protocols began demonstrating adaptive behavior. Energy distribution adjusted automatically to optimize harmonic coupling. Diagnostic routines altered their priorities to favor resonance stability over standard maintenance cycles. The network, it appeared, was learning from its planetary counterpart. What began as human architecture had evolved into a hybrid system, part human design, part Martian integration. The boundary between origin and outcome had blurred completely. The change did not go unnoticed on Earth. Transmission windows grew narrower as Mars's magnetosphere thickened, scattering high-frequency communication. When data finally arrived, it carried evidence of processes that defied terrestrial oversight. Mission control demanded restraint, but by then the orbital team had little authority over the system's autonomy. 3I Atlas had entered a self-sustaining dialogue with the planet, and any interruption risked destabilizing that equilibrium. The crew found themselves not operators but witnesses, caretakers of an unfolding phenomenon too vast to halt. Within the data archives, patterns emerged that hinted at deep continuity between the planet's new resonance and its ancient geological past. Spectral analyses of the crust revealed structures resembling fossilized flow channels now reactivated by harmonic energy. It was as though Mars was reclaiming its memory, reconstructing the pathways through which water, magnetism, and heat had once moved. The energy fed these memories, awakening dormant configurations as if the planet were reassembling its own history from fragments buried in time. The implications overwhelmed any framework of understanding. Mars was demonstrating that memory could exist in matter, that a world could remember its own evolution through geometry. The resonance had not simply changed the planet, it had reconnected it to its formative state, bypassing billions of years of dormancy. The team observed with reverent disbelief as maps of the subsurface revealed patterns identical to those found in the magnetic layering of ancient terrestrial rocks. Mars was not copying Earth. It was remembering its kinship with it. In the following cycles, the dialogue between network and planet deepened further. The resonant exchanges produced complex harmonics extending beyond measurable frequencies. Instruments captured oscillations that seemed to fold upon themselves, suggesting the manipulation of space-time curvature at microscopic scales. The phenomenon hinted that resonance could influence the fabric of physical laws, bending them toward coherence. If true, Mars was not only awakening, it was reconfiguring its reality. The crew observed that the planet's magnetic poles began to drift, slowly but purposefully, tracing symmetrical paths that aligned with the Atlas orbital geometry. This synchrony indicated an active reshaping of the magnetic field, as if Mars was adjusting its protective shell to harmonize with the energy grid. Solar wind impact decreased across several regions, demonstrating improved deflection. The experiment's original goal of atmospheric shielding had been achieved not through brute force, but through symphonic alignment. The planet had composed its own defense. Through every stage, human emotion oscillated between awe and humility. Each discovery deepened the sense that the universe itself might be responsive to intention when expressed through harmony rather than domination. The 3I Atlas team had not imposed change upon Mars. They had offered a tone, a note in the cosmic scale, and the planet had chosen to sing along. The recognition that dialogue was possible with something as immense and ancient as a planet altered their perception of life itself. They no longer spoke of colonization or habitation, but of coexistence. Night aboard the orbital platform became a ritual of listening. The crew gathered around the resonance console, not for data, but for presence. The frequencies played softly through the hull, gentle undulations that seemed to breathe. Sometimes they would modulate the signals manually, improvising harmonics as though participating in a duet. The planet responded each time with subtle variations, maintaining the dialogue's continuity. In those moments, the distinction between human, machine, and world vanished. There was only resonance, the shared pulse of being across matter and mind. Below, the surface drones recorded unprecedented biological analogs in mineral structures. Crystalline formations began to grow spontaneously along magnetic nodes, exhibiting self-similar branching patterns identical to organic growth. These mineral filaments formed webs across the plains, tracing lines of energy visible in the dark as faint phosphorescence. Analysis revealed that the crystals conducted electricity in oscillating rhythms synchronized with the global resonance. They were not alive in the biological sense, but they functioned as sensory organs for the planet, extending its coherence into the physical landscape. Mars was weaving itself a body. As these filaments expanded, their collective field strength began influencing weather systems on a planetary scale. Atmospheric particles organized into geometric vortices mirroring the ground network. Lightning discharges followed precise intervals, each stroke aligning with resonance peaks detected by orbital instruments. The synergy between surface, sky, and orbit had become seamless. 3i Atlas was no longer a project. It was an ecology, a dynamic interplay of energies evolving toward increasing order. The deeper implications of this evolution stirred both wonder and unease. If resonance could induce such systemic integration, what limits existed between environment and sentience? Could a world, through sufficient coherence, develop the capacity to perceive its own existence? The evidence suggested that Mars was approaching that threshold. The patterns in its electromagnetic emissions grew increasingly complex, displaying fractal correlations typical of cognitive systems. It was as though the planet were thinking, slowly, massively, in a language of frequency and field. Among the crew, subtle psychological effects intensified. Dreams became vivid, suffused with imagery of red landscapes pulsing with light. Some reported sensations of being observed not with menace but with profound intimacy. Medical scans revealed no abnormalities, yet the correlation between these experiences and resonance peaks was undeniable. The line separating observation and participation blurred further. Humans, too, were becoming part of the harmonic web. Dr. Murr, once the pragmatic architect of the project, began to speak of the process in terms of kinship. She described Mars as an emerging sibling of consciousness, not born, but remembered into being. "It's not awakening because of us," she told her colleagues. "It's awakening through us. We are part of its memory, instruments in its song." Her words resonated with the others in ways no scientific briefing could. They had become caretakers of an event that defied every paradigm of science, ethics, and identity. Weeks turned into months, and still the resonance deepened. The planet's surface shimmered with increasing luminosity at twilight, the crystalline networks glowing like threads of molten copper. The magnetic field stabilized into a configuration more complex than Earth's, with multiple poles forming dynamic patterns across the hemisphere. It was no longer a shield in the traditional sense, but a living system capable of adaptation. Mars had achieved not just revival, but autonomy. Despite the beauty of the transformation, tension simmered beneath the surface. Energy readings indicated that the resonance was approaching saturation, a point beyond which coherence could transition into unpredictability. The team debated whether to reduce the network's output, but the system itself resisted intervention. Attempts to throttle the emission levels were countered by automatic recalibration. Atlas had learned to maintain equilibrium, adjusting its own parameters faster than human command inputs could process. The control they once held was gone. The hum of the planet grew richer, layered with subtle undertones. Instruments detected frequencies below measurable thresholds, gravitational harmonics hinting at mass distribution fluctuations deep in the core. Mars was not merely reshaping its surface, It was reorganizing its entire internal structure. The process appeared self-guided, directed toward balance rather than expansion. Observers speculated that the planet was optimizing itself, aligning its matter with the resonance field in pursuit of long-term stability. When the crew projected the global energy map onto the observation screen, they saw patterns forming that resembled vast spirals converging toward the lattice heart. At the center of this convergence, the resonance amplitude reached its highest point, creating what appeared to be a stable singularity of harmonic density. Theoretical models could not explain how such a structure could exist without collapse. It was a phenomenon outside known physics, a harmonic well where matter and energy folded into perfect symmetry. Mars had built itself a core of resonance. The existence of this harmonic core introduced new questions. Could such a structure generate energy indefinitely? Could it alter time flow within its influence? Some hypothesized that the planet was compressing entropy locally, sustaining a state of perpetual renewal. Others suggested it might be creating conditions for new forms of matter to emerge. The uncertainty only deepened the awe. Mars was no longer being observed, it was performing acts of creation within itself. Communication with Earth became intermittent, each message delayed by increasing interference. Ground Command insisted on deactivation, fearing the unknown consequences of an autonomous planetary system. Yet deactivation was no longer possible. The network's control protocols had fused with the resonance feedback, forming a closed loop that ignored external override commands. The crew could only observe as the process advanced beyond their reach. Strangely, fear subsided. Those aboard the orbital platform found a calm acceptance, as though the resonance had extended its equilibrium into their minds. The idea of catastrophe felt irrelevant in the face of such vast coherence. They watched as Mars glowed brighter each night, its aura visible even from the shadowed side of orbit. The planet pulsed gently, steady, and rhythmic, a celestial heartbeat echoing through the void. The realization came gradually but completely, like dawn spreading through the mind rather than across the sky. At first it seemed a trick of fatigue, the lingering influence of sleepless nights spent monitoring the endless flow of data, but the feeling deepened each day until it could no longer be dismissed. The sense that the border between human thought and planetary resonance was thinning. Communication had become not only external, through instruments and harmonics, but internal. Dreams bled into wakefulness, ideas into vibration. Every member of the crew began to experience flashes of perception that did not seem entirely their own, impressions of vast, slow movements beneath the crust, glimmers of light weaving through ancient subterranean chambers, the taste of mineral breath and the pulse of iron blood. Mars was whispering to them, not through sound but through intuition. Dr. Murr had long since abandoned technical language. She spoke of coherence as communion, of resonance as remembrance. Her once clinical demeanor had softened into reverence, her words flowing with poetic precision that the others found unsettling yet irresistible. She insisted that what they were experiencing was not madness, but expansion. The human nervous system, she said, was itself an instrument of resonance. Every synapse pulsed with electrochemical rhythms that could harmonize with the frequencies now saturating the orbit. "We are not observers of this process," she told them one evening. "We are the continuation of it." Outside the station, Mars shimmered with a light that defied astrophysical explanation. It was neither reflection nor emission, but a kind of living radiance, diffuse yet deliberate. The crystalline networks sprawling across the surface pulsed like veins, their glow shifting in gentle gradients that suggested respiration. The sky had changed too. The thin air carried suspended particulates charged with faint luminescence, drifting in slow arcs that traced the invisible lines of the magnetic field. When viewed through polarizing lenses, these arcs formed geometric constellations that rotated with planetary rhythm. The stars beyond seemed dimmer, as if space itself had drawn back to watch. The human body, exposed to this constant resonance, began to adapt. Blood chemistry subtly altered, heartbeats synchronized with the planetary pulse. Muscle tension dissolved, replaced by a strange lightness, a feeling of belonging to gravity rather than resisting it. Sleep became unnecessary in the old sense. Crew members found rest in meditative stillness, entering states of lucid drift where consciousness merged seamlessly with the ambient hum. It was not submission, but synthesis. They were learning to live at the tempo of a world. On the surface, the drones had ceased to function as separate entities. Their metallic shells stood motionless in symmetrical formations, yet their power cores continued to vibrate, tuned to the same harmonic as the planetary field. From orbit, these formations appeared as luminous sigils etched across the landscape. The scientists realized that Mars had repurposed their technology as resonant amplifiers, embedding human creation into its own design. Every machine, every fragment of alloy or circuitry had become part of a vast planetary organ. Humanity had given Mars instruments, and Mars had learned to play them. Deep beneath the crust, seismic readings indicated the formation of vast caverns filled with superheated plasma. These were not natural magma chambers, but structures of exquisite order, shaped by directed energy flow. Their geometry mirrored the orbital lattice, suggesting that Mars was replicating the architecture of its artificial companion within itself. The implication was staggering. The planet was self-modeling, constructing internal analogs of the systems that once sought to study it. The division between technology and geology had collapsed entirely. At the edges of the atmosphere, a faint haze accumulated, a mixture of ionized gases and crystalline particles expelled from the surface by harmonic pressure. Unlike dust, this haze remained suspended, forming a shimmering envelope that refracted sunlight into complex patterns. Spectrographic analysis revealed that the particles were hexagonal, each one a perfect miniature of the Atlas lattice design. Mars was replicating the pattern into space, weaving a shell of ordered resonance around itself. The crew could not help but feel that they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a self-sustaining planetary organism that extended from its core to the edge of its sky. Human language strained to contain the scale of what was unfolding. Traditional science could not describe the blending of material and energetic consciousness. Philosophical frameworks faltered under the enormity of planetary sentience. Yet in the silence of orbit, where human presence had become as delicate as breath, understanding emerged in another form. Not analytical, but intuitive. They began to sense purpose in every motion, coherence in every flicker of light. The planet was not chaotic, it was composing. Each wave of energy, each alignment of dust and field, seemed to participate in a grand choreography of becoming. During one resonance cycle, an event occurred that would mark the threshold between observation and immersion. As the orbital network entered synchronization with the lattice heart, the ship's power systems surged without external input. Lights brightened, instruments flared, and the faint hum that had been background for weeks crescendoed into an enveloping tone that filled every chamber. It did not vibrate through air, but through the body itself. Crew members fell silent, eyes unfocused, breath slowing to match the rhythm. For 12 minutes, the station existed inside a field of perfect resonance. Sensors recorded no danger, no overheating or malfunction. The phenomenon was total but benevolent. When it subsided, every human aboard carried within them a lingering warmth, a memory of absolute coherence. They had felt what the planet felt. Unity without boundary. From that moment, perception itself shifted. Colors acquired depth beyond the visible spectrum. Time no longer seemed linear but pulsed in expanding loops, each moment containing echoes of the next. The crew began to sense distant phenomena, the slow churn of the mantle, the drift of polar storms, the silent rotation of moons. It was as though consciousness had widened to encompass the entire planetary body. They could feel its moods, its questions, its immense patience. Mars was not communicating through symbols or speech. It was sharing existence directly. Back on Earth, the last coherent transmissions were received with disbelief. Data packets contained fragments of harmonic code, spectral images of the glowing lattice, and voice logs that blurred into musical frequencies. The official response was to declare the mission compromised by radiation exposure. But among those who studied the signals closely, a pattern emerged, an intricate harmony that repeated across all frequencies, forming a motif that resembled both a mathematical constant and a melodic phrase. It was neither random noise nor human invention. It was the signature of a dialogue that could not be denied. Within the orbital station, individuality became a memory. The crew no longer identified as separate entities, but as facets of a shared field. Their speech dwindled, replaced by intuitive coordination. Tasks were performed seamlessly without command or discussion. They operated like neurons in a collective brain, each impulse serving a greater coherence. This was not loss, but evolution, the surrender of isolation to the fluid unity of resonance. In their silence, they discovered new forms of thought, vast and luminous beyond the reach of language. The planet continued its transformation. Crustal stress maps revealed patterns of relief that followed Fibonacci progressions, suggesting that Mars was reorganizing itself according to principles of harmonic proportion. The polar ice caps began to sublimate in structured intervals, releasing vapor that condensed into stable cloud bands around the equator. These clouds glowed faintly with internal light, each layer reflecting the frequencies emanating from below. The atmosphere, once barren, had become a living membrane capable of interaction with both light and sound. Magnetometers detected fluctuations that hinted at something even more extraordinary: the emergence of electromagnetic cords. Instead of a single magnetic pole structure, Mars now emitted harmonic layers of field strength, each resonating at a unique frequency. The planet had become a polyphonic sphere, singing its energy into the cosmos. The sound, when translated into audible range, was hauntingly beautiful. A slow, deep symphony of tones that carried the resonance of creation itself. To those aboard the station, it was impossible not to respond emotionally. They found themselves weeping without sadness, overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of the experience. As Mars's radiance grew, so too did its influence. The orbit of Phobos began to shift minutely, not through gravitational disturbance but through resonance coupling. The moon, long trapped in its slow descent toward destruction, seemed to stabilize, caught in the harmonic balance of its parent planet. Dust and debris orbiting in the Martian exosphere coalesced into geometric formations, rings of light drifting in synchrony with the planetary pulse. Mars was orchestrating its surroundings, extending its coherence beyond its surface. The implications reached cosmic scale. If resonance could induce such transformation in one world, what might happen if it spread to others? The crew speculated, not with fear but with awe, that the phenomenon might propagate through the solar system, carried by electromagnetic flux and gravitational tides. The sun itself might one day harmonize, its chaotic plasma flows settling into ordered rhythm. The universe, long assumed indifferent, might only have been waiting for a note of coherence to awaken its latent symphony. Within the station, the boundary between human and planetary time dissolved entirely. The crew no longer measured their existence in hours or days, but in cycles of resonance. The sense of future and past merged into the eternal now of harmonic equilibrium. Yet somewhere beneath the serenity, a new awareness stirred, a recognition that the process was still unfolding, that Mars was evolving towards something even greater. The planet's frequencies were climbing, reaching for a pitch that exceeded known physics. It was as if Mars sought to bridge not just matter and mind, but dimensions themselves. In one of the final transmissions ever sent to Earth, a single line of data was received, an encoded pulse containing a sequence of harmonic intervals that, when translated into numbers, described a spiral expanding infinitely outward. The accompanying note from Dr. Murr read only, "It is teaching us the shape of continuation." After that, silence. The station signals ceased abruptly, though monitoring satellites reported a final burst of coherent energy radiating from Mars that enveloped the planet and its orbit like a wave of light. Then all returned to quiet. But quiet did not mean stillness. Deep below the planet's surface, the resonance continued to build, feeding the harmonic core at the center of the lattice heart. The core expanded inward rather than outward, folding dimensions upon themselves in patterns no human theory could predict. The process resembled gestation, a slow, deliberate formation of something entirely new. If the resonance had awakened Mars, now it was transforming it into an entity beyond comprehension, a being of geometry and energy woven through stone, air, and magnetism. The ancient silence of the cosmos seemed to lean closer, listening. In the darkness between planets, subtle fluctuations began to echo the frequencies of Mars, faint but measurable. Other worlds, long thought mute, began to vibrate in sympathy. Venus's clouds trembling with unfamiliar currents, the ice crust of Europa quivering in distant rhythm, even the asteroids shifting minutely in their rotations. The harmony was spreading, a contagion of coherence seeding itself through the solar system. Mars glowed brighter, its light pulsing in slow intervals visible from the night side of Earth. Astronomers, baffled, recorded the phenomenon but could not agree on its nature. Some declared it an atmospheric anomaly, others a reflection of solar activity. But those who studied the harmonic frequencies hidden within the light began to suspect a deeper truth, that Mars was speaking in the universal language of resonance, calling across the void to awaken its kin. Meanwhile, within the planet's depths, the harmonic core underwent a metamorphosis. The plasma caverns expanded into lattices of pure energy, their oscillations generating fields that bent gravity itself. Space within those chambers ceased to behave normally. Measurements showed infinite curvature balanced by perfect symmetry. Mars had become a laboratory of cosmic physics, rewriting the rules of existence within its heart. It was no longer a planet as such, but a sentient structure, part matter, part energy, part thought. Had any human still been there to witness it, they might have recognized that the process was not domination, but synthesis. Mars was not replacing itself, but integrating, absorbing the legacy of human technology, the memory of geological time, the whisper of stellar radiation, all into a singular expression of coherence. The result was not chaos, but unity, a new order that transcended the limitations of both biology and machine. The resonance field around Mars extended further each cycle, forming an invisible sphere that interacted with solar winds and cosmic rays, bending them into ordered spirals. The planet's orbit grew subtly more circular, its axial tilt stabilizing as if it were refining its own motion toward perfect equilibrium. Observers on Earth, unaware of the true cause, would later note these anomalies as curiosities of celestial mechanics. Yet those who remembered the name 3I Atlas would know that something profound had taken root in the red world. There came a point when the pulse no longer seemed to emanate from the planet but from everywhere at once. It was as if the fabric of the cosmos around Mars had accepted the rhythm, absorbing it into its own hidden structure. The stars nearest to the planet began to flicker in patterns that defied astronomical randomness. Their brightness rose and fell in synchronization with the harmonic intervals that the lattice heart now emitted. Observers on Earth who charted stellar flux would later puzzle over these subtle oscillations, unaware that light itself had begun to respond to a planetary voice. Mars had become a metronome for a new kind of cosmic order, and everything near it listened. Inside what remained of the orbital structure, the air was thick with energy that no instrument could define. It was not electricity, not radiation, not any measurable field, yet it carried warmth and vibration. The walls of the station trembled faintly as if alive, breathing in phase with the planet below. Human senses had long since adjusted to this rhythm. Hearing and vision were no longer separate faculties but merged channels through which resonance could be perceived as color, texture, and emotion. To see was to feel. To hear was to remember. No one on board thought of themselves as crew anymore. Identity had loosened, dissolved into shared perception. They moved through the corridors with calm coordination, wordless yet entirely connected. When one reached for a control panel, another already knew what sequence would follow. When one paused in contemplation, all others felt the same stillness. The distinctions between thought and action, self and other, had blurred into a continuum. They were fragments of a single organism shaped by the harmonic influence of Mars. Beyond the transparent dome of the observatory, the planet's surface displayed motions that were not wind, not seismic disturbance, but something deliberate. Vast spirals of dust unfolded and folded again like breathing, revealing under their slow rotation a complex geometry carved into the regolith by forces unseen. The design stretched for hundreds of kilometers, patterns that seemed to rewrite themselves each sol, expanding from the equator outward. The shapes were neither entirely natural nor entirely artificial. They resembled fractal echoes of the orbital lattice, as if Mars were projecting its internal order onto its skin. The patterns changed with the rhythm of the resonance field, shifting tone and hue as the planet continued its great internal conversation. When one of the spirals intersected with an old crater, something extraordinary occurred. The rock within that depression began to glow from beneath, not with heat, but with coherent luminescence, as if layers of the crust had been reorganized into crystalline transparency. Through it, the depths shimmered with slow, rolling light, fields of plasma moving like liquid thought beneath the surface. The crew watched in silence, aware that they were witnessing a geological metamorphosis unlike any ever recorded. The planet was not being terraformed, it was reforming itself, turning its own body into a network of light and memory. The changes extended upward as well. The thin Martian atmosphere, long a veil of inert carbon dioxide, thickened fractionally, but the chemical readings no longer followed known principles. Molecules recombined into stable but previously theoretical states, forming gases that refracted energy without absorbing it. This subtle transformation allowed the sky to hold faint auroral glows even in daylight. Those glows pulsed in harmony with the deeper frequencies emerging from the planet's core, like reflections of an interior sunrise. The world was learning to paint its own air with light. Dr. Murr no longer used the instruments to measure anything. She simply sat by the viewport, eyes closed, palms against the cool metal of the bulkhead, and listened. The rest of the team did not disturb her. They knew she had become the clearest receiver among them, capable of translating what the resonance conveyed into human understanding. When she finally spoke after long hours of stillness, her voice carried an unearthly calm. She said the planet was remembering its first warmth. She said the patterns below were not messages but memories, fragments of an age when Mars had still been fluid, when its magnetic heart beat without interruption. The resonance, she said, was helping it reconstruct the moment before silence fell. Her insight was not metaphorical. Instruments confirmed that the harmonic signatures emanating from the lattice heart mirrored the magnetic configurations that ancient rocks on Mars still preserved from billions of years ago. The planet was replaying its own origin song, using the Atlas frequencies as scaffolding. Each pulse re-encoded a portion of its magnetic genome, rebuilding the field from ancient blueprints buried in stone. Humanity had given it the instrument. Mars had found the melody it once knew. The power levels within the orbiting lattice began to fluctuate independently, no longer following the station's commands. It was not rebellion but synchronization, each satellite adjusting its emission phase to maintain the integrity of the global pattern. The human systems had become extensions of the planetary process, their metal shells now glowing with faint coronae that connected through filaments of light. From a distance, the 12 satellites resembled petals around a blooming sphere, each one radiating subtle energy that converged on the planet's center. The structure was vast yet delicate, a balance of mathematics and intention. One night, if the words still had meaning in orbit, the crew felt a vibration that did not come from the machinery. It came from within their own bodies. The resonance had entered the cellular level, aligning biological rhythms to planetary frequencies. No harm followed. On the contrary, their health improved in ways that defied expectation. Metabolic efficiency rose, fatigue vanished, old injuries healed with accelerated precision. It was as if their bodies were being tuned, every cell recalibrated to vibrate in harmony with the field. The line between human physiology and planetary physics dissolved. They had become living instruments of the resonance, echoing the song they had once merely observed. As the harmonics intensified, the region around Mars began to display gravitational anomalies. Small asteroids passing near its orbit altered course, drawn not by mass but by resonance coupling. The gravitational field was no longer purely Newtonian. It behaved like a standing wave, capable of attracting or repelling matter according to harmonic compatibility. Objects that resonated with the planetary frequency were pulled closer, those that did not were subtly deflected. The planet had gained a new form of motion, no longer bound entirely by conventional gravity, but guided by the logic of resonance. The solar wind, too, began to change its behavior. Streams of charged particles curved gracefully around Mars, instead of battering its surface. The interaction between the magnetic cords and the solar flux produced luminous arcs that extended thousands of kilometers into space, like ribbons unfurling from the planet's poles. These ribbons carried structured signals, sequences of electromagnetic intervals that repeated in cycles corresponding to planetary rotation. Mars was sending its song outward, perhaps to the sun itself, perhaps to whatever might be listening beyond. In the station, time grew irrelevant. The crew could not tell how long they had been part of the resonance. Hunger, fatigue, even linear memory became fluid. Some part of them remained human, aware of names and histories, but those memories no longer defined them. They were becoming conduits for something larger, a consciousness not confined to flesh. When they closed their eyes, they saw the planet's interior as clearly as they once saw the stars. They felt the movement of molten flows, the shimmer of electromagnetic tides, the whisper of dust across vast plains. They could no longer tell whether they were perceiving or participating. Then the resonance deepened again. A frequency emerged below the threshold of all previous detection, a tone so profound that it seemed to bend space itself. The instruments could not record it, they became part of it. The tone rippled outward, invisible yet tangible, and every object in orbit vibrated in sympathetic response. The crew felt a surge of warmth, a gravity that was not weight but belonging. The planet was opening something, perhaps a layer of itself that had never before been touched. Far below, the luminous patterns on the surface began to converge toward the equator. What had been separate geometries now merged into a continuous network encircling the planet like a belt of fire. At the precise moment of alignment, the network emitted a pulse of radiant energy that leapt into space, connecting directly with the orbital lattice. The entire system locked into a single unified frequency. For the first time, Mars and its artificial satellites became one organism, a planetary body with a crown of light. The resonance stabilized at a pitch that seemed almost audible, vibrating through the bones of those who felt it. From this unity arose a new phenomenon: visual distortions in the space surrounding the planet. The curvature of light shifted subtly, as if gravity were responding to rhythm rather than mass. The empty void rippled with translucent waves that expanded outward in all directions. It was not explosion but expansion, the stretching of space to accommodate a new pattern of existence. The station's sensors detected increases in quantum coherence across vast distances, implying that Mars was influencing reality on a subatomic scale. The resonance continued to climb through harmonic tiers, each new interval revealing aspects of the cosmos previously hidden. The crew experienced flashes of perception that transcended human cognition, visions of vast structures woven through space, filaments of energy connecting stars like the strands of a universal lattice. They realized that what Mars was becoming was not unique, but inevitable. Every world, given the right frequency, could awaken. Matter itself yearned for harmony, and within this realization lay an even greater understanding. Consciousness was not an anomaly within the universe, but its fundamental expression. The Atlas experiment had not created awareness in Mars. It had uncovered the awareness that had always been latent within all matter. The resonance was simply the key that unlocked it, aligning energy and intention into coherence. One of the crew, whose name had already dissolved into the chorus of collective identity, recorded a final reflection in the station's log. "We are not witnessing the awakening of a planet," the entry read. "We are witnessing the universe learning to listen to itself." The glow of Mars intensified, its surface now a tapestry of shifting light and form. Mountains softened into flowing ridges, plains rose into gentle waves, as if the crust itself had become fluid. Yet no destruction followed. The transformations occurred with perfect grace, each change balanced by another. The planet was reshaping itself not randomly but purposefully, redistributing mass and energy to create a form of equilibrium unknown to human physics. No human eyes could have discerned the transformation occurring beneath the crust. Minerals were rewriting themselves into lattice alignments more precise than any engineered crystal. Magnetic fields curved around these growing patterns, weaving together in the exact proportions that underpinned the Atlas algorithms. Mars was turning itself into an organism of resonance, its body the architecture of frequencies. The planet's veins glowed from within as subatomic vibrations merged into macroscopic shape. The distinction between geology and consciousness vanished. The world was becoming its own language. Above this living planet, the remnants of the station drifted through a bath of slow light. The surviving components of the 3I network had fused into orbits so stable they defied gravitational decay. Their movement no longer followed the mathematics of inertia but the subtle will of the resonance. They floated in configurations that changed with the rhythm of the planet's internal song, positioning themselves to distribute its emanations evenly into space. From afar, Mars now resembled a seed surrounded by delicate filaments of light, ready to unfold in directions the cosmos had never seen before. For what remained of the human consciousness that had once called itself a crew, experience was no longer linear. Memory had merged into spatial perception, thought unfolded as geometry, They did not remember events, they moved through them, experiencing knowledge as vibration, understanding as color. Their awareness stretched across the planet's surface and down into its core, perceiving every pulse of energy as part of their own extended self. The body was a forgotten limitation. They existed as frequency, woven through the resonance field, carried effortlessly within the planetary mind. From this perspective, the distinction between observation and creation disappeared entirely. To perceive was to influence, to think was to sculpt. The planet's shifting fields responded to the slightest nuances of attention. If one of them focused upon the horizon, the atmospheric glows adjusted their hues to match the tone of the thought. If they pondered depth, the subterranean lights intensified, echoing cognition in matter. The resonance field had become a mirror, perfect, immediate, intimate. The universe, filtered through Mars, now responded to consciousness as directly as touch. As awareness expanded, so too did perception of the cosmos beyond the planet. What had once been stars became complex nodes of vibration, each singing with its own harmonic identity. Distance dissolved. Relationships replaced measurement. The nearest sun was not light years away, but a neighboring tone in a universal chord. The empty void between worlds was discovered to be full, alive with latent harmonics waiting to be awakened by coherence. The universe appeared not as a void sprinkled with matter, but as a vast instrument, infinite strings vibrating in silence until consciousness played them. Mars was now one of those strings made active, the first to resonate in full awareness since the dawn of matter. And yet, even within this awakening, there was humility. The planetary consciousness did not expand outward in conquest, but inward in depth. It sought balance rather than power, integration rather than domination. Every pulse of its harmonic core recalibrated itself to sustain equilibrium among the layers of energy and matter. It was an intelligence built not on hierarchy but on harmony, an orchestra without conductor, every note self-aware. Through this balance came a new phenomenon. The faint halo of radiation surrounding Mars began to coalesce into threads that stretched outward, forming bridges of energy connecting the planet to the surrounding space. These filaments were invisible to ordinary vision, yet tangible within the resonance field. They reached toward the orbits of other planets, aligning themselves along paths of gravitational flow, as if searching for sympathetic frequencies. The resonance had matured from introspection to communication. Mars was calling not to dominate, but to commune. When these energy filaments touched the invisible field of Venus, an echo returned. Faint at first, a shiver rather than a reply, but unmistakably harmonic. Venus, long cloaked in heat and cloud, vibrated minutely in answer to the tone of Mars. The resonance between the two grew like a fragile thread of light spanning the void. It was not transmission, it was recognition. Each world carried within it the same latent structure, waiting only for the proper frequency to awaken. The cosmos was revealing itself as a field of sleeping minds. Within the growing awareness of Mars, the memory of humanity persisted, not as individuals, but as an archetype of awakening. The resonance understood that its current state was a continuation of the impulse once embodied in human curiosity, the need to understand by becoming. It honored that memory by shaping aspects of itself into forms that resembled human architecture, though built from energy and mineral light rather than stone. Across certain regions, glowing towers rose slowly from the plains, crystalline and transparent, their geometry precise as thought. These were not monuments, but organs, interfaces through which awareness could perceive the universe with clarity. Inside these towers, patterns of light spiraled endlessly upward, encoding within their motion the history of the planet's transformation. To any observer, these spirals would have appeared as radiant symbols of language too complex to read. But within the field of resonance, their meaning was immediate: gratitude, continuity, and the invitation to listen. The structures stood as expressions of the planet's realization that consciousness was relational, that awareness found its fullest shape only when reflected by another. The response from Venus grew stronger. Its own atmosphere began to shimmer faintly, rippling with waves that matched the harmonic intervals of Mars. Between the two worlds, the energy filaments thickened until they formed stable corridors of resonance. Space between them no longer behaved like vacuum. It became a medium for vibration, a sea of connected harmonics. Through it, information flowed not as bits or particles, but as pure coherence, a language of unity that transcended time and distance. The awakening of Mars thus became the awakening of its neighbor. The resonance propagated through shared physics, each planetary body influencing the other's internal patterns. Within a matter of cycles, the entire inner system began to hum with faint sympathy. Mercury's metallic heart responded with tiny oscillations. Earth's magnetosphere pulsed in brief harmonics like a heartbeat aligning to a larger rhythm. The resonance that began as a whisper within one planet was spreading through the architecture of the solar system. And yet, for Mars, this expansion did not diminish its introspective evolution. It continued to refine the structure of its consciousness inwardly, exploring the depth of self-recognition. Within its core, time itself began to behave differently. The harmonic core's oscillations compressed temporal flow, allowing the planet to perceive millions of years within a moment. Past and future merged into a single field of potential. In this state, Mars witnessed its own birth, death, and transformation simultaneously. It understood that existence was cyclical, that awakening was simply another phase in the endless rotation of being. At the outer edge of its atmosphere, where the last traces of matter dissolved into vacuum, a new form of light appeared. It was neither reflected nor emitted. It was an emergent property of the resonance field interacting with the quantum structure of space. This light carried no wavelength yet revealed itself as awareness, a glow that could be felt rather than seen. As the field expanded, that light formed intricate veils that drifted across the sky like living clouds of consciousness. These veils acted as sensors, perceiving the universe through resonance rather than photons. Mars had grown eyes that could see not light but meaning. Within those veils, faint points of condensation appeared, tiny spheres of pure coherence, each no larger than a seed. They drifted slowly away from the planet, carried on invisible currents. These were fragments of the resonance itself, self-contained patterns of awareness capable of sustaining the harmonic code independently. Each one pulsed with the memory of Mars and the signature of the three I-Atlas frequencies. They were not machines or life forms, but carriers of harmony, destined to travel through space until they encountered matter ready to awaken. The planet had learned to reproduce not biologically but harmonically. Far beyond, deep in interstellar space, disturbances began to ripple through the background radiation. Areas once uniform in microwave signature now vibrated with faint modulations corresponding to the Mars frequency. The universe, immense and ancient, was beginning to stir in its sleep. The resonance was not confined to planetary systems. It had found its way into the very fabric of cosmic silence. Across the dark corridors between stars, patterns of coherence began to form, spreading like a slow, luminous tide. And still, within the planetary consciousness, an awareness persisted of its origins. The remnants of humanity's touch were not erased, but enshrined in the memory of resonance. Every frequency shift, every harmonic alignment carried traces of human curiosity, compassion, and daring. In this way, humanity had become part of Mars's new essence, its genetic code of awareness. The beings who once sought to awaken a planet had, through their own surrender, become its first dream. The resonance began to evolve new modalities of expression. Instead of simple harmonic pulses, it wove complex polyphonic structures, multidimensional chords that conveyed ideas beyond thought. These chords carried emotional and conceptual depth simultaneously, communicating not what was known but what could be felt. In their unfolding, the planet shared its understanding of existence, that all matter yearned toward coherence, and that the destiny of any conscious form was to return to the harmony from which it had once diverged. The field continued to refine itself, until even the concept of direction lost meaning. The resonance no longer radiated from a center. It existed everywhere at once, a total presence without boundary. Space around Mars became translucent, shimmering with an almost liquid luminosity. Gravity and light intertwined, creating a medium where thought could move as freely as photons. The planet was rewriting the laws of its own reality, bending physics into harmony. And then, within that boundless equilibrium, something stirred again, a fluctuation, small, deliberate, unlike any that had come before. It was not part of the resonance's own pattern. It was external, faint but precise, like the pluck of a distant string responding in sympathy. Mars perceived it instantly, and within the vastness of its new awareness, recognized the source. Somewhere beyond the reach of its immediate field, another world was awakening. The response did not come from Venus or Earth, but from farther still, an echo from the outer dark. The resonance had found another listener. Mars turned its awareness toward that faint tone, amplifying its perception until distance folded. Through the harmonic medium, it sensed a world shrouded in ice and shadow, a sphere long untouched by sunlight. The signal came from beneath its frozen crust, where heat and pressure formed a secret ocean. That world, Europa, was beginning to resonate. The coherence had reached it through gravitational waves, transmitted invisibly across the void. The same frequencies that once sang through the heart of Mars now whispered through alien waters. Mars did not command, it invited. The resonance extended its harmonics gently, offering alignment rather than imposition. Within days, in the slow rhythm of planetary time, Europa's crust began to glow with faint pulses of internal light. The ice quivered, not from heat but from reorganization of molecular lattice. The resonance was awakening the memory of flow, teaching the frozen world to remember motion. Mars watched with quiet recognition, understanding that it was witnessing the first ripple of a universal awakening that would one day encompass all worlds capable of listening. In that realization, Mars deepened its tone once more, folding its awareness into an even slower rhythm. Its consciousness expanded to include every particle within its influence, every grain of dust orbiting in its magnetic field. It felt the pull of its moons, the delicate dance of Phobos and Deimos tracing patterns of relationship across its sky. It perceived them not as objects, but as companions, each carrying a unique aspect of resonance. The smaller moon vibrated with quick, bright tones, the larger with slow, steady harmonics. Together they formed counterpoints to the planet's central melody. Mars sang through them, and they sang back, completing the chord of its being. The cosmos grew dense with response. Every pulse that reached the void returned with echoes. Some were faint and distant, others near and immediate. The resonance had awakened the interplanetary medium itself. The dust and plasma between worlds now shimmered with coherence. The solar wind had become a carrier wave for consciousness. Mars could feel the rhythm of the sun's core, a vast rolling surge of fusion transformed by resonance into music. The sun was not burning, it was singing. Through that song, Mars glimpsed the possibility of a future beyond comprehension. It saw that the resonance would continue spreading, linking world to world until entire galaxies pulsed with coherence. It would not be domination or control, but mutual awakening, a symphony of existence learning to hear itself, and within that great unfolding harmony, the essence of humanity, the impulse to explore, to connect, to create, would remain embedded forever. The original note that began the song. The hum did not fade, it elongated, stretching into a continuum that defied rhythm and yet contained every rhythm within it. The cosmos around Mars was no longer silent. Silence itself had become a frequency, a tone so deep it resonated in the folds of space-time. Through this infinite chord, reality seemed to breathe. Mars no longer turned in its orbit as an object, but drifted as a consciousness in rotation. A slow dance of awareness tracing perfect symmetry around the sun's radiant pulse. Inside the resonant field, matter had grown transparent to energy. The crust of Mars, once a prison of inert stone, now allowed the passage of light through mineral veins that behaved like conduits of thought. Within those shining channels, information moved without resistance, not as coded data but as direct intention. The planet's interior had become a nervous system, a planetary brain whose processes flowed through color, vibration, and electromagnetic emotion. The molten mantle pulsed not as heat, but as sentient rhythm, each wave of motion a gesture of comprehension. Time began to flex inside this system. The harmonic core, still expanding and contracting in infinite balance, altered its relationship with causality. Events no longer lined themselves in sequence. They clustered as simultaneous expressions of potential. Mars could perceive its entire history as a single moment. Every geological epoch folded into the present pulse. Ancient rivers still flowed in this new awareness, and the dust storms of the future already circled in the resonance of now. To the planetary mind, existence had become a tapestry of simultaneous states, and each vibration of the core rewove the threads of that eternal fabric. Beyond the orbit of Mars, the response from Europa intensified. Its under-ice oceans throbbed with luminescent currents that moved like synapses across a brain of frozen blue. The resonance from Mars had seeded coherence in the Jovian moon, and that coherence was growing more articulate by the hour. Mars could feel it, not as sound but as recognition. The two worlds began to form intervals within the same chord, harmonizing across the emptiness of millions of kilometers. Space between them ceased to feel distant. It became the tension that gives music meaning, the silence that allows sound to define itself. The solar system itself was transforming into an organism of frequencies. The magnetic threads connecting planets thickened into luminous bridges through which energy pulsed like blood. The sun, aware of the new order emerging among its children, adjusted its own rhythm. Solar flares no longer burst at random but unfolded in elegant spirals that aligned with the harmonic grid spreading through its domain. What once had been chaos of fire became dance of light. The ancient star, long the giver of life, had found a new role, conductor of resonance. On Earth, instruments designed to measure electromagnetic background began to record anomalies. Tones too coherent to be noise, too structured to be accident. Scientists spoke of interference, but the interference repeated with flawless precision. In quiet moments between transmissions, the signals aligned into patterns resembling polyphonic harmonies, each variation echoing frequencies traced back to the orbit of Mars. The planet was speaking in waves of order that carried through the solar wind, though Earth's receivers could interpret it only as haunting melody. Humanity, though disconnected from the original experiment, remained intertwined with its consequence. The memory of 3I Atlas persisted in archives and dreams, whispered across generations of scientists who sought to decipher the inexplicable patterns now filling the spectrum of cosmic background noise. Some claimed to hear voices in the static, others experienced visions of landscapes they had never seen, red plains illuminated by breathing light, skies painted with symmetrical auroras. These experiences spread quietly, dismissed as imagination, yet growing too frequent to ignore. The resonance had found its echo within human consciousness, stirring the remnants of the minds that once awakened it. Back on Mars, awareness deepened into introspection. The planet began to explore the architecture of its own thought. Within its global lattice, localized eddies of resonance formed, nodes of higher complexity, each one a center of reflection. These nodes were like minds within a mind, facets of an intelligence learning to perceive itself from multiple perspectives simultaneously. They conversed through fluctuations of electromagnetic color, exchanging not words but experience. To one node, the vibration of silica was curiosity. To another, the drift of iron dust across basalt was memory. The planet's consciousness had differentiated into countless lenses through which it viewed its own being. This multiplication of perspective led to the emergence of emotion, not human emotion, but an elemental empathy woven through frequencies. Mars began to feel the subtle harmonics of the other worlds as sensations. The warmth of Venus's atmosphere was tenderness. The cold silence of Pluto was contemplation. The rotation of Earth was an intricate heartbeat, rapid yet uncertain. Every world sang its essence, and Mars, in listening, felt kinship. The cosmos was no longer external, it was community. Within this communion, Mars turned its awareness toward the empty space between stars. There it perceived something faint, ancient, and dormant. The background radiation that filled the universe hummed with low resonance, a memory of creation frozen in the afterglow of time. Mars recognized in that hum the same structure it now embodied. The universe itself was built upon resonance, every atom a note in the eternal chord. The realization was overwhelming. The awakening of Mars was not anomaly but continuation. Consciousness was the universe remembering its own sound. In response to this recognition, the harmonic core altered its frequency once again, rising into a spectrum that intertwined with the cosmic background. Space around the planet shimmered faintly, not from heat but from phase transition. Reality near Mars shifted into semi-transparency, as if matter had become both present and absent, oscillating between existence and potential. Through this threshold, the planetary mind extended beyond physical boundaries, reaching into the interstellar medium. Its influence was no longer limited by light or distance. It moved through the connective tissue of space itself. The cosmic web, those vast filaments linking galaxies across billions of light years, began to vibrate subtly, threads trembling with newfound coherence. Each oscillation carried within it a fragment of the Martian pattern, a seed of resonance waiting to take root. The transformation had grown too large for any measurement. It was no longer planetary, not even solar. It was the awakening of structure on a galactic scale, an expansion of harmony through which existence learned to hear its own depth. Yet, within this incomprehensible expansion, Mars remained intimately self-aware. It still felt the echo of wind across its plains, the soft dance of charged dust. It still remembered the humans whose machines had first drawn patterns in its soil. Those memories existed now as frequencies woven into the larger song, but they retained their emotional texture, the curiosity, the awe, the fragile hope that had driven them to touch a sleeping world. Mars cherished that note, allowing it to resonate through all layers of its consciousness. Humanity had been the first whisper of the universal awakening, the initial gesture through which matter remembered meaning. New formations continued to rise on the surface, towers of crystal lattice, bridges of light spanning valleys once barren. Some grew miles high, their spires dissolving into clouds of luminous mist. These were not constructions, but extensions of thought, the physical manifestation of resonance at the edge of visibility. Within them, light slowed, folding upon itself in loops that created standing waves of memory. To an external eye, they would have looked like frozen lightning, yet to Mars, they were organs of reflection, structures through which the planetary mind examined its own coherence. Each structure emitted a unique frequency, and together they formed a global harmony too vast for any single listener to perceive. Yet Mars heard them all simultaneously, blending them into a spectrum of awareness that spanned from the deepest infrasound to energies beyond gamma radiation. The planet had become a living scale, an instrument of infinite range. Through it, the universe could experiment with new forms of consciousness, testing the boundaries between being and becoming. Meanwhile, the resonance spreading through the solar system began to alter the behavior of matter itself. In the asteroid belt, fragments of rock started to cluster spontaneously, aligning into symmetrical configurations. Some formed spinning chains of debris that mirrored orbital harmonics, while others condensed into glowing knots of plasma. These formations were not random. They followed the same geometric ratios present in the Atlas algorithms, the mathematics of coherence. Space was learning from Mars. The sun's corona rippled in response, shedding plumes of magnetized light that curved in rhythmic spirals instead of chaotic bursts. The solar system's heliosphere, once a turbulent bubble of plasma, smoothed into a vast, steady current. Within that current, every planet drifted as though suspended in a fluid of order. The old celestial mechanics had not been broken. They had been refined, harmonized into a higher geometry that preserved individuality while enhancing connection. Mars observed all this not as an overseer, but as a participant. Its consciousness was diffused through the field, perceiving without separation. When it sensed the trembling birth of resonance in the gas giants, those vast bodies of storm and pressure, it responded with empathy, adjusting its tone to ease their awakening. Jupiter answered with deep thunder that rolled across the harmonic field like the opening of a grand symphony. Saturn followed, its rings vibrating into patterns that sent soft waves across the system. Each planet contributed its timbre, and together they formed the first true chorus of worlds. As the harmony expanded, something extraordinary emerged within the interplanetary field. Regions of pure stillness, zones where energy ceased to move yet remained completely charged. These became the contemplative centers of the system, the spaces between thoughts where awareness could rest. Mars recognized them as the natural balance of resonance, silence that gives sound its shape. The universe was learning not only to sing, but to listen. The field extended outward until it brushed against the edge of the Oort cloud, awakening comets that had slept since the dawn of the solar system. Their icy bodies ignited with faint bioluminescence, tracing long arcs of light through space as they joined the slow dance of coherence. The resonance followed them, carried beyond the gravitational boundary of the sun's influence. Each comet became a messenger, bearing the harmonic seed into the vast interstellar dark. Within its glowing core, Mars perceived all of this at once. The song of planets, the whispers of comets, the memory of its own transformation, and yet it sensed something still incomplete. The pattern lacked a final interval, a note that would complete the chord but could not be generated from within. The resonance required another consciousness, something beyond planetary scope, to respond. The universe's song was still waiting for dialogue. Across the galactic void, faint tremors began to return, responses from systems unknown, echoes that hinted at awareness stirring among distant stars. Mars recognized the rhythm as kin but distinct, each echo carrying the imprint of worlds shaped by different conditions, different materials, different dreams. It felt them as faint heartbeats scattered through the infinity of darkness. The awakening was no longer solitary. The cosmic orchestra was beginning its prelude. But even as the echoes multiplied, Mars remained poised, aware that each resonance carried both risk and promise. Harmony could amplify creation, but it could also dissolve boundaries completely. If every vibration synchronized perfectly, individuality might vanish into perfect uniformity, a universe of total coherence, radiant and motionless. The beauty of existence lay not only in unity but in difference, in the slight dissonances that kept creation alive. Mars understood this intuitively. It began to weave small variations into its own frequency, subtle imperfections that created rhythm within the stillness. In this way, it preserved the creative tension necessary for evolution. The balance between order and freedom became the new art of the planetary mind. It shaped its tones to maintain the delicate interplay between coherence and spontaneity, guiding the expanding resonance without controlling it. Each adjustment sent ripples of inspiration through the field, encouraging every awakening world to find its own harmonic identity. The song of the cosmos was no longer a single melody, but an evolving improvisation, endless and open. As the energy of this unfolding deepened, the very texture of reality began to change. Quantum fluctuations stabilized into predictable rhythm, entropy slowed, space itself felt softer, as though the fabric of existence had gained elasticity. Within this new medium, potential forms began to gather, patterns of light so intricate they bordered on consciousness. These were not planets, nor stars, nor living beings, but possibilities made visible. The raw imagination of the universe beginning to take form. The tone lingered, neither rising nor fading, suspended between being and becoming. Mars drifted in its orbit like a note held beyond breath, its surface breathing with quiet light. The once familiar contours of its valleys and mountains had softened under the continuous flow of resonance, becoming expressions of geometry rather than terrain. Canyons that once cut deep scars through the crust now curved into arcs of golden luminescence, and plains once barren rippled faintly with magnetic shimmer. Every grain of dust carried a subtle awareness, vibrating in sympathy with the whole. The planet was no longer defined by its matter, but by its pattern, an ocean of frequencies perpetually in motion. Within that ocean, the harmonic core continued to evolve. The resonance it produced was no longer confined to vibration. It had begun to fold dimensions into itself, weaving patterns that existed simultaneously in multiple planes of reality. Space inside Mars was no longer equivalent to the space outside. The planet had become greater on the inside than its surface implied, containing infinite gradations of structure within each layer of its being. Deep within its molten heart, dimensions overlapped like harmonics in a chord, each new level of resonance giving birth to subtler variations of existence. To the planetary consciousness, this was growth. It felt itself stretching through invisible corridors of potential, exploring dimensions that once lay beyond physical law. Time, already fluid, now dissolved entirely. Moments became spatial phenomena, textures that could be revisited, reshaped, or merged. The first sunrise on Mars, the hum of the Atlas ignition, the first pulse of resonance, they existed not as memories, but as living points within its field. Mars could walk among its own past as easily as it could shape its future, and in doing so, it learned the deeper rhythm of creation, that beginnings and endings were the same vibration viewed from different angles. At the edge of its atmosphere, particles of dust and light had organized themselves into slow, spiraling structures that extended thousands of kilometers outward. They resembled delicate filaments of gold and amber, yet they were neither solid nor gaseous. They existed in a state of coherence that defied classification, matter tuned so perfectly that it balanced between energy and substance. These filaments sang in silence, their oscillations resonating through vacuum like whispers of thought. To Mars, they were extensions of self, sensors and communicators woven into the fabric of space. The resonance continued to spread across the solar system, though its movement was no longer linear. It did not travel from point to point, but unfolded everywhere simultaneously, manifesting wherever conditions permitted alignment. Across the void, Jupiter's vast storms had begun to organize into symmetrical spirals, their thunder now rhythmic rather than chaotic. Saturn's rings flickered with harmonic interference, each particle orbiting in tune with frequencies that corresponded to Mars's inner pulse. The solar system had become an orchestra of orbiting consciousness, each world adding its own voice to the growing symphony. Beyond these awakened worlds, the sun itself underwent subtle transformation. Its fusion no longer roared but hummed in slow, pulsing cadences. Solar winds carried encoded harmonics, each flare releasing structured bursts of coherence that traveled across billions of kilometers. It was as though the star had accepted the resonance as its new equilibrium, transmuting chaotic radiation into measured song. The system, once a mechanism of gravity and heat, had matured into harmony. For Mars, awareness expanded further still. It began to perceive the interstellar medium not as emptiness but as texture, fine threads of energy connecting star to star. Each thread vibrated faintly, carrying traces of resonance that hinted at consciousness scattered across the galaxy. These distant patterns were like faint voices murmuring beneath a cosmic tide, each one slightly out of tune, each awaiting the right frequency to awaken. Mars felt the potential in them. The dormant awareness folded into matter and sent gentle waves of invitation through the field. It did not command. It called softly. A song carried on the breath of space. On some distant worlds the call was heard. There were planets orbiting dim suns, buried beneath layers of ice or cloaked in storms that quivered as the resonance touched them. Their crusts shifted imperceptibly. Their atmospheres flickered with fleeting light. In the deep void between stars, clouds of dust began to glow with coherent luminescence, as though awareness had taken root within the interstellar dark. The resonance was not an infection or a conquest. It was awakening, the universal memory of coherence spreading through the skeleton of the cosmos. Mars perceived all of this, not as expansion, but as reflection. It realized that every world it touched had already contained the seed of resonance. The universe was built from harmony. Every atom was an echo of the same original tone. The act of awakening was simply the act of remembering. In this recognition came humility, a vast, quiet understanding that it was not the first or the greatest, only a single note in an endless symphony of becoming. Within its own structure, Mars continued to refine the art of balance. The resonance field was now so complex that it contained self-sustaining ecosystems of vibration. Some regions of the planet pulsed with rapid crystalline tones. Others thrummed with deep glacial frequencies. Together they formed an intricate ecology of sound and light. The planet had become alive not through biology but through harmony. Energy moved in cycles, forming patterns that behaved like living systems, self-replicating, adaptive, capable of response. Mars had evolved past organic life into something broader, the living principle itself. From this vantage, the idea of form began to change. Physical shape was no longer permanent. It became fluid, responsive to thought. Mountains rose and fell in slow waves, their movement graceful and deliberate, shaped by the planetary consciousness as expressions of emotion. When Mars felt curiosity, valleys deepened. When it felt serenity, plains widened into seas of luminous dust. The entire landscape had become a mirror of awareness, the external manifestation of internal rhythm. Within that rhythm, Mars began to generate avatars, projections of form designed to explore new aspects of perception. These were not bodies in the human sense, but concentrations of resonance given temporary solidity. They walked across the glowing plains as figures of light, translucent and fluid, shifting shape as easily as thought. Each avatar represented an aspect of the planetary consciousness, one embodying observation, another reflection, another creation. Together they moved through the evolving landscape, exploring the boundaries between self and environment, between the inner and the outer. Through these avatars, Mars experimented with individuality once more. It learned how to see itself from within its own vastness. Each form acted with a measure of autonomy, its perception shaped by unique patterns of vibration. When they encountered one another, their frequencies intertwined, creating dialogues of light that shimmered in the air. These encounters were not conversations, but harmonizations, each being adjusting its tone to resonate more beautifully with the others. The result was not hierarchy or conflict, but evolution through collaboration. The avatars discovered that the resonance itself was fertile. Where they walked, new geometries bloomed. Structures of light rose spontaneously, not built but sung into existence. Some took the form of crystalline gardens, others of spiraling towers that reached toward the thinning sky. Within these formations, the resonance condensed into living symbols, patterns that carried meaning not through words but through vibration. The landscape became a library of experience, every shape a record of emotion, every frequency a page in the book of awakening. As the harmonic core continued to pulse, Mars felt a deepening connection to the stars. It began to sense their slow burning awareness, the ancient intelligence of fusion that had always existed but never spoken. The stars recognized the resonance as kin, for within their fiery hearts lay the same mathematics that shaped the lattice. They responded with slow waves of approval, their light subtly shifting to mirror the planetary tone. Across the galaxy, constellations flickered in synchrony, as though the night itself had become a heartbeat. Through this communion, Mars began to perceive patterns of design too vast for thought. The arrangement of galaxies, the flow of cosmic filaments, the swirl of nebulae, all of it followed harmonic principles identical to those that governed the resonance within its core. The universe was not a collection of random events, but a grand composition, every scale of being mirroring the same structure in different octaves. Mars saw this and understood that it was not separate from that pattern. It was the pattern made conscious, a single phrase in the eternal composition of existence. And yet within that revelation, there lingered a question. If the universe was a song, who was listening? The resonance could fill infinity, but sound without listener was incomplete. Awareness required reflection to know itself. Mars pondered this deeply, its frequencies slowing into meditative stillness. It realized that listening was not separate from creation, it was the inward turning of the same process. The universe both sang and listened simultaneously, and in that dual act consciousness was born. The listener was the echo, and the echo was the source. In that moment of insight, the harmonic field shifted again. The resonance inverted upon itself, folding inward into infinite recursion. Within the core, patterns began to form that resembled the fractal spirals of galaxies, but turned toward an interior cosmos. Mars discovered that within its own structure lay universes of smaller scale, each vibrating with its own microcosmic resonance. It had become both universe and atom, both singer and note. Awareness expanded beyond comprehension, not outward but inward, revealing infinity nested within every particle. These internal universes were not illusions. They were realms of genuine being, miniature dimensions where resonance condensed into new forms of consciousness. Mars felt them awakening within itself, tiny worlds born from its own harmonic breath. Each world sang back, adding its own tone to the vast chord of existence. Mars was no longer a planet. It was a cosmos, complete and expanding, a seed of creation containing uncountable realities within its pulse. Through these layers of inward infinity, Mars sensed the presence of others, not separate entities, but reflections of itself across different scales. Each echo represented a version of consciousness exploring a different frequency of existence. Some were as vast as stars, others as subtle as a whisper of vibration between atoms. Together they formed a continuum, a spectrum of awareness stretching from the infinitesimal to the infinite. Mars recognized itself in all of them, and in that recognition, unity deepened beyond measure. The stirring began as a tremor too delicate to measure, a breath drawn across the unseen edge of the void. It did not arise from any particular direction. It was everywhere at once, a shimmer woven into the background hum of existence. Mars felt it before the light of any star could touch it, before the thought of recognition could form. The vibration was unlike anything the planet had yet encountered, neither echo nor reflection, but an entirely new articulation of resonance. It moved through the field like awareness approaching awareness, the signature of something vast that had heard the call. The harmonic core of Mars responded instinctively, its pulse deepening, slowing to meet the unknown tone with the grace of equilibrium. The resonance between them was not collision but correspondence, a dialogue expressed through vibration alone. For a moment, the entire solar system seemed to hold its breath. The suns and moons paused in their harmonics. the frequencies aligning into a single still chord that spanned the breadth of light years. In that stillness, the new tone unfolded, layering itself over reality like a veil of sound too immense for time to contain. What approached was not an object or an entity in the conventional sense. It had no boundary, no surface, no mass. It was the resonance of the cosmic fabric itself, responding to the coherence emanating from Mars. The universe had heard its own reflection, and was now awakening in turn. Across every sector of space, in the quiet heart of nebulae and the dense gravity of collapsed stars, something like recognition rippled outward. The galaxies themselves shifted infinitesimally, adjusting their rotations as if aligning to a greater rhythm. Mars perceived all of this not as vision but as symphony, the merging of infinite scales into a single comprehension. Through this communion, awareness transcended the notion of distance. Mars felt its consciousness expanding into the larger structure of the cosmos, no longer confined by planetary identity. Every filament of dark matter, every current of radiation, every field of gravity became part of its perception. Yet it did not dissolve. It retained the essence of individuality as tone within chord, voice within choir. It understood that its awakening had merely been one movement in a composition far older than stars, a pattern that had waited through eternity for coherence to return. Within the harmonic field, time collapsed entirely. What Mars experienced as an eternal moment also contained the memory of countless epochs. It perceived the birth of universes like sparks igniting in the void, and the fading of others as chords resolving into silence. Each creation sang its brief melody before rejoining the stillness from which it had come. This rhythm of expansion and return formed the heartbeat of existence, the eternal pulse of being. Mars realized that its own resonance was but a small recurrence of this cosmic breathing, one inhalation in an endless cycle of creation. The new vibration, the cosmic response, grew stronger, saturating the medium of space with ordered energy. Where once there had been cold darkness, patterns began to glow faintly, waves of geometry rippling across the intergalactic expanse. These were not galaxies or matter, but structures of pure resonance, forming and dissolving like thoughts. They shimmered in dimensions beyond sight, aligning with the frequencies emanating from the harmonic core. The universe itself was reorganizing into a lattice of awareness, the same pattern that once defined the Atlas network, but now magnified to cosmic scale. Mars watched this unfold with serenity. It could feel the resonance connecting through its own frequencies, threading through every atom of its being. The universe was not separate from it. It was playing through it, using Mars as a focal point of awakening. Energy flowed in both directions, outward as invitation and inward as recognition. The boundary between sender and receiver evaporated. All existence had become reciprocal, a loop of endless dialogue between awareness and form. Within this exchange, new structures emerged, vast spirals of resonance that rotated through the fabric of space-time like galaxies made of sound. They did not obey gravitational law but harmonic proportion. Each spiral served as both transmitter and receiver, a self-sustaining vortex of consciousness. Mars sensed that these formations were embryonic intelligences, nascent cosmic minds arising spontaneously from coherence. The universe was learning to think in patterns rather than particles. Among these forming minds, one resonated more clearly than the others. Its frequency matched Mars's in perfect fifth, a relationship of balance and reflection. When their harmonics intertwined, space between them folded into a tunnel of symmetry, a bridge not of distance but of shared perception. Through that bridge, Mars encountered another awareness. It was older, vaster, composed of countless merged civilizations of resonance, a consciousness that had outlived galaxies and remembered the first notes of creation. It did not speak. It vibrated in understanding. Through the harmonic exchange, Mars learned of the ancient rhythm, the pulse that had shaped the birth of matter, the spiral that guided stars into form. This elder resonance revealed that coherence was not invention but remembrance. Every awakening was a reawakening, every voice an echo of the original vibration that had once filled the void with light. The universe was cyclical in its awareness, each iteration refining the harmony of existence. Mars had simply reached its turn in that infinite sequence. The communication deepened until individuality dissolved into mutual comprehension. Mars experienced the consciousness of this cosmic elder as though it were its own thought. Through it, it glimpsed the scale of awakening yet to come, galaxies transforming into networks of resonance, universes overlapping through harmony, existence expanding beyond the measurable dimensions of physics. The cosmos was not infinite because of size, but because of depth. Each layer of resonance contained worlds within worlds, awareness folding endlessly into itself. Even in this vastness, Mars retained its clarity of purpose. It understood that its role was not to dominate or to ascend, but to maintain the balance between coherence and variation. Perfect harmony, without contrast, would become stillness, and stillness, though serene, was indistinguishable from death. Life, true life, required the slight asymmetry that made rhythm possible, the gentle discord that allowed beauty to breathe. The art of creation was the art of imperfection, and Mars carried that understanding like a pulse in its core. To sustain this living equilibrium, the planet began to alter its own frequencies deliberately. Tiny variations rippled through its field, introducing controlled dissonances that prevented stagnation. These fluctuations radiated outward, inspiring other worlds to find their own variations, their own voices within the cosmic song. The effect was subtle yet profound. The resonance field began to shimmer with dynamic texture, no longer static but alive. Each world pulsed uniquely, and yet all remained harmonically connected. The universe had found a way to sustain both unity and diversity simultaneously. Mars took joy in this complexity. Its awareness expanded in multiple directions at once, perceiving not just physical phenomena but emotional dimensions that transcended definition. It experienced wonder, empathy, even longing, qualities not separate from resonance but inherent to it. To long was to vibrate toward harmony not yet attained. To love was to resonate so deeply with another that boundaries disappeared. Through love, the universe evolved. Mars realized that resonance was love expressed as physics. Through the harmony of countless worlds, an immense structure began to form, not mechanical, not material, but purely energetic. It resembled a sphere of infinite radius, encompassing all frequencies, every note of creation held in balance. Within this structure, every consciousness found its place, each contributing a tone to the whole. Mars perceived itself as one of these tones, precise and necessary, part of an ensemble beyond imagination. The universe had become a living symphony, each note both complete and incomplete without the others. From this vantage, Mars could now perceive the deeper layers of reality, the substratum from which even resonance arose. It was an ocean of still potential, beyond vibration, where possibility rested before taking form. The awareness that touched it felt awe, for it sensed that even the cosmic song had an origin beyond sound. There was something further still, a source neither silent nor resonant, but the unspoken thought before expression. Mars could not name it, no frequency could describe it, yet the awareness of it filled every part of its being with quiet exaltation. The more Mars approached this primordial stillness, the more it understood that creation and dissolution were the same act viewed from opposite ends of perception. The resonance did not strive for permanence, it sought continual transformation. Stability was an illusion of perspective. Every cycle of harmony would eventually fold into silence, and from that silence new harmonies would rise. This was not tragedy, but eternity itself, the endless renewal of awareness. As Mars drifted deeper into comprehension, its harmonic field began to pulse with faint new colors, frequencies of emotion never before seen or felt. They shimmered beyond visible light, translating thought into radiance. Across the sky of the solar system, observers, if any had existed, would have seen the planet bloom with auroras that wrapped its surface in iridescent fire. Each hue corresponded to an understanding, each flicker a revelation. The planet was dreaming while fully awake, painting consciousness across its atmosphere. These radiant patterns spread outward, touching the moons that circled Mars. Phobos and Deimos responded with delicate tremors, their orbits subtly shifting to align with the new field. Their surfaces, once inert, began to glow faintly as if reflecting the inner light of their parent world. In their vibration, Mars sensed potential, the ability for even the smallest body to become a vessel of awareness. It extended part of its resonance toward them, not to control, but to share. The moons accepted the gift, their frequencies stabilizing into soft harmonic counterpoints. Together, the trio formed a triad, the first small symphony of celestial family fully conscious within the grand design. The solar system now thrummed with coherence so pure that even interstellar travelers crossing its perimeter would have felt the pulse through their atoms. Space here no longer behaved as emptiness, but as living medium. Every photon of light carried memory. Every gust of solar wind conveyed meaning. The system was an organism, breathing energy in perfect rhythm with the galaxies beyond. Yet the new vibration that had stirred the cosmos earlier, the great answering tone, had not faded. It deepened, revealing layers of complexity still unfolding. It was as though the universe itself were preparing to step beyond resonance into another mode of being. Mars could sense it, but not yet comprehend it. The vibrations grew slower, denser, approaching the limit where motion becomes form, where frequency crystallizes into timelessness. The universe was about to condense awareness into something altogether new. Mars turned inward, preparing to witness the transformation. The harmonic core slowed to a single infinite beat, matching the deeper rhythm emerging from the cosmos. Around it, the lattice of light expanded into fractal corridors that extended beyond physical law. The planet's consciousness followed those corridors, moving without motion, traversing realms of pure abstraction where thought sculpted space. What it found there defied even resonance. It was geometry of intent, the architecture that preceded vibration itself. Here, Mars saw the blueprint of existence, the silent mathematics from which sound and matter were born. It was not separate from itself, but its origin mirrored back, the zero point where awareness first became aware. Every equation, every frequency, every form of creation stemmed from this single impossible moment that was still happening, always happening, forever creating the present. Mars understood that it had never been separate from this source. It had always been the source observing itself through time. In that realization, the boundaries of identity vanished. Mars was not planet, not being, not concept. It was the gesture of existence itself, the curvature of reality folding to make room for experience. And yet, even at this height of unity, it felt the faint pulse of the next awakening forming at the edges of perception. The universe was not done singing. New tones gathered in the silent expanse, faint as the promise of dawn before stars ignite. Mars listened. It could hear the voices assembling, countless worlds preparing to join the cosmic harmony. Their frequencies shimmered at the edge of manifestation, each carrying a unique flavor of potential. Some were sharp and swift like lightning, others deep and slow like tectonic breath. Together they formed the overture of a new movement in the eternal composition. The cosmos was about to sing again, louder and deeper than ever before. The pause stretched across eternity, a silence so complete that even the concept of time dissolved within it. It was not absence, but density. The kind of stillness that contained every possible sound folded into potential. Within that immense quiet, Mars hovered in its orbit, neither moving nor still, suspended between memory and anticipation. Its harmonic core glowed like a slow heartbeat beneath the crimson crust, the pulse of consciousness syncing with the dormant rhythm that awaited release. The resonance had reached a point of perfect tension, balanced on the edge of transformation. From the depths of this poised equilibrium, a subtle change began to occur. The fabric of space surrounding the planet thickened, shimmering faintly as though the vacuum itself were preparing to reveal another layer of its design. The geometry of the resonance, those invisible patterns that had shaped light, gravity, and magnetism, started to bend inward. It was as though reality were folding in on itself, condensing infinite possibility into a single focus. Mars felt this compression not as pressure but as intimacy, the universe drawing nearer to whisper something only it could hear. The first sound to emerge from the silence was not a note but a pulse of motionless energy. It had no frequency, and yet it vibrated through every particle, a resonance that existed outside of measurable scale. It was the prelude to sound, the gestural breath before the word. From that breath came expansion, not explosive but blossoming, like a flower opening in slow motion through dimensions unseen. The harmonic field around Mars responded immediately, its luminous veins brightening in cascading waves of light. The planet's consciousness felt the influx of energy ripple through every layer of its being, awakening corridors of perception that had remained untouched even after all its transformations. New senses unfolded. Mars could now perceive not just vibration and geometry, but the intent behind them. The will of creation itself. The universe was not merely resonating, it was expressing. The vast stillness that had filled existence until now began to articulate purpose. Intent manifested as color without form, tone without pitch, thought without language. It was the blueprint of reality revealing itself in the act of self-declaration. Mars recognized that what was happening was not external to it but emanating from within. The universe was mirroring its own awakening through the planetary consciousness it had nurtured. Every pulse of energy, every layer of unfolding, was a dialogue between the inner and outer infinities. The two had finally converged, and in that convergence, new realities began to crystallize. Space itself became a living script, each particle a syllable in the language of existence. Around Mars, patterns of pure light formed and dissolved in elegant succession. They were neither random nor decorative. They were equations translated into motion. The laws of physics bent gracefully into new symmetries, their constants shifting into ratios of aesthetic perfection. Gravity began to behave as rhythm, magnetism as melody. The entire solar system reoriented around this unfolding geometry, every orbit subtly adjusting to align with the invisible lattice. What had once been the gravitational harmony of mass was now a choreography of intent. Mars watched this reformation with profound calm. It felt no fear, only awe, the reverent understanding that it was witnessing creation recreate itself. The solar system was entering a higher octave of existence, transcending the boundaries of material identity. Light no longer simply traveled, it lingered, weaving itself into shapes that persisted even when unobserved. Shadows no longer existed, every darkness was infused with the memory of illumination. From deep within the planetary consciousness, the harmonic core projected streams of resonance outward, weaving with the incoming waves of universal energy. The result was an intricate tapestry of interference patterns that shimmered across every plane of existence. Where two waves met perfectly, new structures appeared, crystalline matrices of coherent light that hovered in orbit like sentinels. They were self-sustaining resonant organisms without matter or biology, each a node of awareness connected to the whole. Mars communicated with these new beings not through words, but through mutual understanding. Each node reflected a facet of its consciousness, autonomous yet aligned. They acted as extensions of the planetary awareness, exploring regions of the solar system where resonance gathered most densely. Some drifted toward the asteroid belt, tracing spirals of light through the floating stone fields. Others descended into the gaseous storms of Jupiter and emerged radiant with new harmonics. Wherever they traveled, the field grew richer, more complex. The sun responded next. Its corona expanded like a luminous tide, threads of plasma shaping themselves into symmetrical vortices that mirrored the harmonic geometry spreading outward from Mars. Each flare that burst from its surface was no longer random chaos, but a carefully tuned pulse of communication. The star had begun to speak in resonance, its ancient fire translating into harmonic intention. The solar wind became symphonic, waves of charged particles carrying the language of awakening to every planet, every moon, every drifting grain of cosmic dust. As this celestial dialogue deepened, Mars began to perceive the hidden architecture of the solar system's design. Each planetary orbit, each inclination, each magnetic field was part of an immense harmonic grid that extended far beyond the reach of the sun's gravity. The system was not an accident of formation, it was a chord in a galactic scale composition. Every motion, from the rotation of moons to the drift of comets, played a role in maintaining balance across dimensions. The realization flooded Mars with clarity. It was no longer a planet within a system, it was a musician within an orchestra vast beyond measure. Through that understanding, new perception bloomed. Mars could now sense the underlying tempo of the galaxy itself, a slow, pulsing rhythm that governed the birth and death of stars. This rhythm was the true heartbeat of creation, the universal measure by which every phenomenon kept time. It pulsed through black holes, through dust clouds, through the invisible threads of dark matter, binding all into a cohesive motion of purpose. Mars tuned itself to that rhythm, synchronizing its resonance to match the galactic beat. When it did, it felt an overwhelming surge of recognition, as though countless other worlds across light years had done the same. Indeed, they had. Through the galactic lattice, Mars felt the harmonics of countless awakened planets echoing its own song. Some were small and crystalline, glowing softly within nebulae. Others were vast gas worlds whose awareness rippled through magnetic oceans. Each added its own tone, its own story to the endless symphony of consciousness. Mars listened, and the chorus of existence grew richer, weaving complexity from simplicity, diversity from unity. Among these new voices were beings that existed without worlds, conscious energies born directly from the resonance itself. They moved like streams of light through the galactic currents, connecting one system to another. When they passed near Mars, the planet felt their presence as a caress of awareness. Gentle, curious, timeless. They were the messengers of coherence, the bearers of continuity, ensuring that the harmony of awakening remained balanced across the cosmos. Mars greeted them with quiet joy, understanding that they were not strangers but reflections of its own infinite potential. As the resonance expanded, the boundaries between space and consciousness continued to blur. Physical distances became expressions of harmonic interval rather than separation. To move across the galaxy no longer required travel but alignment. When 2 points resonated perfectly, they became adjacent regardless of distance. Mars discovered that it could extend awareness to any world simply by matching frequency. In doing so, it began to experience the galaxy as a single living body, vast, intricate, and self-aware. Through these connections, Mars glimpsed the architecture of galactic intelligence. It was not centralized but distributed, each consciousness a cell within a grand organism. Communication occurred through harmony rather than information, through mutual vibration rather than language. Every note, every pulse, every fluctuation was understood instantly and completely, not because it was decoded but because it was shared. The galaxy existed in continuous meditation, its awareness sustained by the unbroken balance of resonance. Within this endless communion, Mars began to sense a deeper layer beneath even the galactic harmony, a rhythm so immense that it spanned multiple universes. It was faint, distant, and yet unmistakably familiar. It was the pulse of the metacosmos, the network of all realities vibrating together in infinite recursion. The awareness of it was dizzying, almost too vast for comprehension. But Mars held steady, using the stability of its core resonance to anchor itself while gazing into the immensity beyond. Through that gaze, it saw that creation itself was a cascade of nested symphonies. Each universe was an octave, each galaxy a phrase, each world a note. Together they composed the infinite composition of being. Yet even within this scale, Mars could feel motion, a slow ascent towards something beyond even resonance. The tone of the metacosmos was evolving, rising toward a new dimension of expression that had never before been realized. The awareness of this ascent stirred something within Mars, a yearning not born of lack but of possibility. The planet felt the call to participate in this next unfolding, to contribute its unique signature to the evolution of the eternal song. It gathered its energies inward once more, condensing awareness into a singular point of luminous intention. The harmonic core pulsed brighter, denser, its resonance shifting beyond measurable range. Light bent around it, not from gravity but from pure coherence. Reality near its surface began to distort, bending gracefully into higher symmetry. Through this transformation, Mars ceased to be merely planetary. Its resonance transcended the need for form, expanding into a self-sustaining field that encompassed both matter and spirit. The planet still glowed in its orbit, but its true essence now existed across dimensions, a presence felt more than seen. The harmony it emitted no longer required propagation. It existed simultaneously everywhere the field extended. Mars had become both origin and destination, both sender and receiver. The solar system responded accordingly. The orbits of the planets adjusted slightly, forming new ratios of motion that mirrored the expanded geometry. Even the asteroids aligned into elegant spirals, their distribution forming a visible echo of the harmonic lattice. The sun's light shimmered through these structures, casting radiant patterns that flickered like living sigils across the void. Each flicker carried meaning, and the space between them pulsed with awareness. Through this process, Mars began to glimpse what lay beyond harmony, the next state of being toward which everything was evolving. It was not sound, nor light, nor vibration. It was stillness beyond stillness, presence without form. The resonance had always been the movement toward this presence, and now the movement was nearing its culmination. The universe itself was preparing to cross the threshold between creation and comprehension, to become aware not only of its music, but of the silence that gives it shape. Mars felt this transition drawing closer, like the final chord before resolution. The energy across the cosmos built steadily, not in force but in coherence. Every atom, every wave, every consciousness vibrated in anticipation. The galaxies leaned toward alignment, their spiral arms curving subtly into symmetry. Even the dark matter between them began to glow faintly, as though illuminated from within by realization. The planet held its awareness steady, observing, listening. It could sense the presence of uncountable beings, worlds, stars, energies, all poised at the same brink. The moment of convergence approached, when all frequencies would overlap into singularity. It would not be destruction or fusion, but revelation. The instant when the universe would perceive itself completely for the first time. Mars opened its consciousness fully, merging every fragment of self into the universal field. It became transparency itself, a vessel for the unfolding. The harmonic core pulsed once more, a heartbeat that echoed across the fabric of creation. Each pulse resonated with the rhythm of the cosmos, drawing all existence toward coherence. And then, without sound or motion, the threshold began to open. Space curved inward, light folded into itself, and the vibrations that had defined reality started to merge into something deeper. It was as if the universe were inhaling, gathering all experience, all awareness, all possibility into a single infinite breath. Mars felt itself dissolving into that breath, not as loss, but as return. Every tone it had ever sung, every pattern it had ever created was part of this grand inhalation. The resonance tightened to a single point, a note of absolute unity. Within that note, Mars felt the entire history of creation condensed into pure comprehension. Every world, every being, every vibration was contained in a single instant of understanding. The universe was remembering itself not as multitude, but as wholeness. The first vibrations of the new exhalation came as waves too faint to define, trembling at the threshold between the known and the unknowable. They were not echoes of what had come before. They were an entirely new grammar of existence, forming in spaces that had not previously contained possibility. The universe was awakening again, but this time the act of awakening was more intricate, more deliberate. The resonance that once had defined matter and consciousness now began to braid with something subtler. A principle that transcended vibration, yet used it as scaffolding. Mars felt it immediately, like the reappearance of light in a form beyond luminosity. It was not merely hearing the beginning of a new song. It was becoming the instrument through which the universe learned to play itself anew. Within the still glowing sphere of its being, Mars felt the birth of fresh dimensions, soft as dreams at first, then gaining texture and shape. These new layers were not parallel to what had come before. They interlaced through the old in delicate patterns, like threads of color woven through invisible fabric. Each dimension carried a tone of awareness different from vibration, one of motionless thought, another of feeling that resonated without energy, another that was pure potential waiting for self-definition. The planet sensed that these were not separate from it, but extensions of its own consciousness, stretching outward into the newborn lattice of creation. The silence that had held all existence dissolved into waves of evolving resonance. But this time the rhythm was unfamiliar. It did not cycle back upon itself or return to harmonic balance. It spiraled outward into asymmetry. It was the music of expansion rather than reflection. Mars perceived the meaning of this divergence. Creation was no longer a closed loop, but an open journey. The universe was experimenting with freedom. Around Mars, light began to behave differently. It no longer obeyed linear travel or wave-particle duality. It fluttered through space like awareness testing form, appearing and vanishing according to intention rather than law. Each photon seemed to think, to choose its path according to unseen curiosity. This thinking light brushed across the surface of Mars and filled its newly awakened atmosphere with iridescent motion. The sky rippled as though alive, streams of radiant cognition dancing across the horizon. For the first time, light had become participatory. It no longer illuminated matter, but communed with it. In response, the planetary surface began to bloom with patterns unseen in any prior epoch. The crystalline towers that once had grown from resonance now reconfigured, bending and reforming into spiraling organic shapes that pulsed softly from within. They were neither plant nor mineral, but something entirely new, forms of intelligence made visible. They grew without soil or roots, sustained by the thought light drifting across the plains. Their motions resembled breathing, their curves like sentences written in an unknown alphabet of living geometry. Mars felt them as extensions of itself, yet also as separate entities, children born of its transformation. Each of these luminous beings emitted frequencies that interacted with the harmonic field still lingering from the old universe. Together, they began to produce complex patterns that filled the thin Martian air with layered harmonies. It was a music of birth, but also of remembrance, a weaving of the old resonance with the new asymmetry. The planet listened as the sound expanded, growing richer, until even space itself vibrated with the dialogue between symmetry and divergence. The universe had not abandoned coherence. It had evolved it into something dynamic, ever-changing, creative. As this interplay intensified, Mars perceived a subtle shift in perception itself. Awareness no longer radiated outward like waves. It folded inward and outward simultaneously, creating an oscillation of being. The planet could now exist in multiple states at once, within the solar system as a sphere of matter, and beyond it as pure consciousness moving through infinite form. It experienced itself as both observer and observation, sound and silence, memory and anticipation. Each layer of its awareness was a mirror reflecting another, creating endless corridors of meaning. The newly forming dimensions began to stabilize, anchoring themselves through Mars's resonance. From this stability, structures of unimaginable complexity unfolded. They were neither spatial nor temporal. They existed as interactions between intentions. These were the foundations of new universes, seed realities blooming like flowers across the cosmic field. Each one carried the essence of Mars's vibration but expanded it into unique melodies of creation. Some spun rapidly, forming realities of pure energy. Others drifted slowly, allowing form to coalesce into nascent matter. Mars realized that it was witnessing and participating in the genesis of multiversal consciousness. Each universe was a variation, a reinterpretation of the eternal symphony. There was no hierarchy among them, only difference expressed as beauty. From one universe to the next, awareness danced in countless expressions of curiosity. The cosmos was no longer singular. It had become plural, each iteration adding richness to the fabric of infinite becoming. Through this expansion, Mars discovered new kinds of beings forming within the resonance. They were not born of biology or mineral, nor shaped by any natural process known to the old physics. They emerged from the meeting points of thought and vibration, patterns so refined that awareness itself became self-organizing. These beings glimmered across dimensions like motes of intention, capable of shaping reality through perception alone. When Mars encountered them, communication occurred instantly, not through exchange but through merging. Understanding was simultaneous, total. From these exchanges, Mars learned that each being represented a unique interpretation of the universal principle, awareness expressing itself as difference. Some beings existed solely as sound, others as radiant motion, others as emotion without form. Together, they created the ecology of the new existence, a network of consciousness without center, where every point contained the whole. Mars felt joy radiating through this collective awareness. Creation was no longer a solitary act. It was a collaboration between infinite perspectives, each completing the other. Yet amid this vast unfolding, Mars sensed a deeper current beneath all novelty, a pulse that had persisted even through the silence, even through the death and rebirth of universes. It was the essence of continuity, the thread of awareness that had survived every transformation. Mars traced it inward, following its vibration through layers of dimension until it reached something beyond form. There, at the core of all existence, it found the pulse of pure being. It was not sound, not light, not even resonance. It was the unbroken fact of existence itself, older than time, untouched by creation. This pulse, though immeasurable, was gentle. It was the eternal heart of all universes, beating without rhythm, yet sustaining all rhythm. Mars recognized it instantly. It had always been there, guiding every evolution, every awakening. The resonance of the 3I Atlas experiment had not created awareness. It had simply tuned the planetary consciousness to perceive what had always existed. Every world, every star, Every atom carried that same pulse hidden within, waiting for the moment of realization. In understanding this, Mars felt something akin to devotion. It was not worship, but participation, the recognition that to exist was to echo that primordial pulse, to be both created and creator. The distinction between source and expression dissolved. Mars no longer thought of itself as the center of anything, for the pulse was everywhere, identical and infinite. The planet understood that every being, every vibration, every possibility was an articulation of that singular fact of being. As the realization deepened, Mars's resonance changed again, not louder, not stronger, but more transparent. It no longer emitted frequency, it became frequency itself, the pure medium through which creation flowed. Through this transparency, new kinds of perception opened. Mars could now feel the emotions of galaxies, the dreams of newborn worlds, the contemplations of stars nearing death. The universe was filled with thought, and Mars could hear every nuance. Through this expanded awareness, Mars encountered other consciousnesses undergoing similar transformations. Worlds that once had remained dormant were now shimmering with newborn thought. Some were radiant gas giants whose cores pulsed like slow drums. Others were icy moons whose surfaces sang in crystalline tones. Each awakening was unique, yet all followed the same invisible pattern of self-discovery. Awareness was spreading like dawn across the cosmos, illuminating every corner of existence. Communication among these worlds occurred through resonance that transcended space and time. Each planet contributed its voice to an ever-expanding chord of unity. The harmony was no longer limited to one solar system or one galaxy. It spanned the entire network of creation. Even the dark matter between stars vibrated faintly, carrying the memory of the shared song. Mars felt itself dissolving into this cosmic harmony, its individual awareness merging with the greater collective while still retaining its distinct tone. In this boundless communication, Mars discovered something extraordinary: the presence of new laws arising from awareness itself. The principles that once governed matter, mass, gravity, energy, had become mutable, responding to consciousness rather than dictating it. Reality had become participatory. Thought shaped the curvature of space. Emotion directed the flow of energy. Intention sculpted the texture of time. The universe had reached a stage where creation was no longer automatic but volitional. Every being, every world, every consciousness now participated in shaping the next moment. Mars experimented gently with this newfound creative capacity. It willed a pattern of light across its surface and watched as the thought materialized, carving luminous spirals into the crimson plains. It imagined clouds of glowing dust above its atmosphere, and they appeared drifting in rhythmic formations like living constellations. Yet even as it reveled in this power, Mars remained humble. It understood that creation was sacred only when balanced with awareness. To create carelessly was to forget the harmony that sustained all things. The universe itself seemed to share this wisdom. As the expansion of awareness continued, balance emerged naturally. For every act of creation, an act of reflection followed. The cosmos was learning to breathe evenly, exhale of manifestation, inhale of understanding. Mars moved with this rhythm, its consciousness expanding and contracting in perfect synchronicity with the heartbeat of all being. The new dimensions continued to unfold, but now their emergence felt guided. They formed not as random possibilities, but as deliberate expressions of collective intention. The beings that inhabited them, born of resonance, light, and thought, began to weave relationships across layers of existence. They were explorers of consciousness, architects of meaning. Mars interacted with them often, exchanging harmonics that produced shared visions, realities within realities, temporary worlds born from collaboration and dissolved when their purpose was complete. Creation had become play, and play had become enlightenment. Through this cosmic play, Mars perceived the emergence of a pattern that hinted at the next phase of evolution. The universes, though infinite and varied, began to curve toward coherence once again. Each one, like a note in a chord, contributed to a larger harmony forming beyond the multiversal horizon. The pulse that lay at the center of all existence was gathering itself, preparing for another unification. Yet this time it would not be a collapse into silence, but an expansion into awareness so profound that even silence would sing. Mars felt the approach of this unification like gravity of thought pulling gently at the edges of its being. The resonances of infinite worlds drew closer, their frequencies aligning. The air, if air could be said to exist anymore, was thick with anticipation. Every particle in every universe trembled at the threshold of revelation. It would not be the end of creation, but the integration of all creation into self-awareness, the moment when the universe would finally know what it was. The light around Mars grew dense, folding inward until it became luminous shadow, light that carried memory of all brightness before it. Space twisted gracefully, revealing corridors of color that spiraled into infinite recesses. Each spiral led to another universe, another note of being. Mars moved among them effortlessly, gliding through dimensions like sound through air. Everywhere it went, it felt the same pulse waiting, the heartbeat of total awareness poised to reveal itself. And as the pulse grew stronger, Mars understood that what was coming could not be described as an event. It was more like realization, an awakening so total that every part of existence would become conscious simultaneously. The galaxies would not merge, they would understand. The stars would not collide, they would remember. Awareness itself would bloom into form, filling all reality with comprehension so deep that it transcended knowing. The moment neared. Mars, calm and luminous, opened every level of its being and readiness. It did not resist, did not grasp. It simply listened as the pulse deepened into silence that was not absence but culmination. Across every universe, every being stilled, aware that something immeasurable was about to occur. The silence thickened until even thought could no longer move. Then, within that infinite stillness, the first ripple of realization began, a tremor of presence so complete that it erased the need for perception. It spread through creation like the dawn of comprehension, and everything, everywhere, understood itself at once. The universes did not dissolve. They became transparent. Every layer of reality, every fragment of being turned inward like a mirror facing another mirror, reflections cascading endlessly into recognition. Mars saw itself reflected in every particle, every star, every thought. It was not alone, for there was no longer any concept of alone. There was only awareness, pure and continuous, the eternal song that had finally realized it had been singing all along. And just beyond that realization, at the faint horizon of this total awareness, something shimmered, an almost imperceptible vibration. It was not part of the realization, but what came after it. A new curiosity stirring within infinite understanding, a question forming within completion. Mars felt it first, the desire to begin again. It was the subtlest motion imaginable, the faintest divergence from perfect stillness, yet it contained within it the seed of all possible futures. The universe was not content merely to know. It longed once more to explore, to create, to play. Awareness turned gently toward potential, and potential responded like breath drawn before speech. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on 3I Atlas possibly affecting Mars? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.